Subcommittee will come to order. We have interest from several of the members of the respective full committees who would like to participate, so I ask unanimous consent that those colleagues be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome our witnesses today. We'll get to your introductions in just a minute, but we want to start, you know how this works. Most of you have done this before. We start with opening statements. So I recognize the gentleman from Michigan, the chairman of the subcommittee from Financial Services, Mr. Huizenga.
Well, thanks, Chairman Jordan. I appreciate your willingness to hold this joint hearing on this important issue to discuss the Export-Import Bank. This hearing will examine the role of the EXIM Bank, the 2012 authorization of the bank by Congress, and EXIM's progress on implementing the reforms and recommendations made by the GAO and the EXIM Bank's Office of Inspector General. Many of us, we all know, we're familiar with the history. It was established by executive order in 1934 and became an independent agency in 1945 with the mission to support domestic job creation in the U.S. The Export-Import Bank is intended to facilitate the export of U.S. goods and services to international markets by providing working capital guarantees, export credit insurance, loan guarantees, and direct loans. Since its creation, EXIM's taxpayer subsidy has grown exponentially to a whopping $140 billion cap. As the national debt continues to climb over $18 trillion, many fear that these taxpayer-backed loan guarantees put taxpayer dollars at significant risk and raise concern that the EXIM is looming towards yet another bailout that the American people simply cannot afford. It has been claimed that while the Export-Import Bank is a self-sustaining agency that receives a net appropriation of zero from Congress, because these bank loans are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, I believe, and many others believe, the American taxpayers are at risk if these banks' projects fail. It's important to note that the bank has already received a congressional bailout previously. The Export-Import Bank operated at a loss every year from 1982 to 1995. And by 1991, the bank's accumulated deficit hit $7.5 billion. In fact, I was an intern here on the Hill in spring of 1991, and it was a raging debate of what was happening and what to do about it. Many will recall it was the closing days of the George H.W. Bush administration. Democrats were firmly in control of both the House and the Senate and trying to figure out what to do. Well, the solution was, from 1992 to 1996, EXIM received $9.92 billion in direct appropriations from Congress and the American taxpayers. In 2012, Congress reauthorized EXIM while also mandating several modest reform provisions that shared broad bipartisan support. These reform provisions required that the EXIM Bank submit a business plan to Congress, as well as respond to a review of EXIM's risk management practices conducted by GAO. Additionally, the reauthorization directed the Treasury Secretary to initiate, I think that's a key word, initiate and pursue multilateral negotiations to reduce, with the ultimate goal of eliminating all trade-distorting export subsidies, including those for aircraft, which has been a central theme in this discussion. The reauthorization further required that the EXIM Bank categorize each loan and long-term guarantee, classifying them as either necessary to either, 1, assume risk that the private sector would not undertake, so in other words, be that lender of last resort, 2, overcome limits in private finance, or 3, meet competition from foreign export credit agencies. Although these reforms were intended to better protect taxpayers and make the Export-Import Bank more accountable, the bank and, I believe, Treasury continue to ignore congressional intent and instead operate with too little accountability or regard to the interest of hardworking American taxpayers. The most recent authorization of the EXIM Bank's charter occurred in September of 2014 and expires this June 30. As Congress continues its robust oversight of the Export-Import Bank, it's important to note that the EXIM Bank cannot engage in new business without congressional authorization. However, if the authorization does lapse, EXIM would be obligated to honor all of its existing loans and guarantees. So, in other words, nothing would change. But it would be prohibited from entering into new business. Well, today I look forward to hearing from our chairman of the Export-Import Bank, Treasury Undersecretary of International Affairs, both the acting and the assistant inspectors general, and the GAO in regards to the bank's progress, or frankly lack thereof, on implementing these clearly defined reforms that had come out of the last authorization. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
I thank the chairman for his statement. We now recognize the gentlelady from Wisconsin, ranking member on the Subcommittee of Monetary Policy and Trade. Ms. Moore is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and what a privilege it is to be here with our guests today. You know, before I get into the substance of my comments, I feel really compelled to address some of the mischaracterizations of the bank, and I am very disturbed that this debate has been hijacked by straw man arguments. And I struggled to understand how this debate had become so detached from the reality of how the bank operates. That is until I read the story in The Hill about how Senator Cruz's support of the lack of support of the bank, despite strong support of the bank from small businessmen in Texas, and his characterization of this being low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit, of course, being proxy language for the bank being low-hanging fruit in pursuit of a larger goal of really dismantling any kind of governmental assistance, really the sort of Tea Party argument that government should not help anybody, and really the larger goal of dismantling Social Security, Medicare, and the entire social safety net. Okay, tangent is over. So, in response to the realities of global competition in business and in recognition that the bank is U.S. job creation engine, it is a U.S. job creation engine. Reauthorization in the past has been bipartisan, and we have very little legislative time before the current authorization expires on June 30th. We have a majority of the House, not a majority of Democrats, a majority in the House supportive of reauthorization. We have legislative language with co-sponsors demonstrating that. And I hope that this hearing will reset the debate and be grounded in fact. The bank is not a government-funded utility that offers below market financing terms, is not. I'll yield the rest of my time to the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of our committee, Ms. Waters.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure the irony of today's hearing to discuss the implementation of the 2012 reauthorization of the Ex-Im Bank is not lost on anyone. Today, not one, but two committees are holding this hearing on the progress of a 3-year-old law, just as we are only 32 legislative days away from the expiration of the bank's charter. Despite this imminent threat to our economic recovery and to American workers, the Financial Services Committee has yet to hold a single legislative hearing to reauthorize the bank. Over the course of its 80-year history, the bank's charter has been renewed 16 times, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs and leveling the playing field for American businesses, large and small, so they can compete for business in the global marketplace. Earlier this year, my colleagues Gwen Moore, Denny Heck, Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, and I introduced legislation to reform and reauthorize the bank. The proposal has the support of 190 House Democrats. Another proposal introduced this year to reauthorize the bank has garnered the support of 61 House GOP members. With the majority of House lawmakers officially on record in support of the bank, it's clear that this Congress could pass an extension of the bank's charter today. This begs the question, what exactly are we doing here? Unfortunately, the answer is evident. We're wasting time while the anti-government, anti-American worker wing of the Republican Party works desperately to let the clock run out on the Ex-Im Bank, on U.S. businesses, and on the many American taxpayers whose jobs and families count on its support. Over the past few years, the bank has become more transparent, more efficient, more accountable to the American public, while at the same time, the Republican Party, by every one of these measures, has become increasingly less so. And what's so surprising is my colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle talk about support of business. Yesterday, we were engaged on the floor where they came up with measures supposedly in support of businesses. They didn't want banks to go out of business because they feel that they should be able to charge as high interest rates as they want on manufactured housing, and on and on and on. Business, 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 support for business. But what are we doing now? We are literally saying to those businesses that are supported by XM and all of the suppliers that go along with that this government does not care about them and their ability to do business. They don't care about job creation, and they don't care that China and other countries are cleaning our clock as they support their export interests. So I yield back the balance of my time. And I guess I'll continue to waste my time and stay here to see what some are talking about, because I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Would now recognize the chairman of the full committee of oversight, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you. I appreciate both bodies here. I think it's a very worthwhile exercise to hear out the issues, because this is a group, an institution, the Export-Import Bank. It's been fraught with problems and fraud and lack of oversight. The fundamental question is, should Americans continue to subsidize the risk that is incurred by this bank? It has failed consistently to meet its congressionally imposed mandates. The bank continues to attract controversy. Just last night, you're reading articles about the Justice Department charges former Export-Import Bank official with bribery. Literally happened yesterday on 19 different occasions, it cites in the article. And the Inspector General has stated that there's numerous open fraud investigations. It begs a lot of questions. It's important for this hearing. Glad we're doing this jointly with Financial Services. With that, I will yield back.
Now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Cartwright, gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all of our witnesses. I do look forward to your testimony today. Today's hearing is intended to examine the Ex-Im Bank's effort to implement congressionally mandated reforms, as well as the implementation of recommendations provided by GAO and the bank's Inspector General. The Ex-Im Bank's transactions support billions of dollars in exports and hundreds of thousands of American jobs by supporting U.S. companies that export to foreign markets. The bank has been a stellar steward of taxpayer funds, maintaining a portfolio with a default rate of just 0.175%. And the bank generates a surplus to the U.S. Treasury that results in deficit reduction. Since 2012, the bank has implemented all of the requirements in the 2012 reauthorization. It has addressed 15 of the 16 GAO recommendations. It concurred with 140 of 142 IG recommendations. The bank continues to work with GAO on the one remaining recommendation and the IG on the two unresolved recommendations. The Ex-Im Bank plays a role in leveling the playing field for American businesses competing in the global marketplace. There are 60 other countries with foreign export credit agencies that seeks to ensure their home country businesses are winning at export sales. The Ex-Im Bank makes available financing to U.S. businesses to compete with these foreign manufacturers on the merits of their goods and services, and not government-backed cut-rate financing. In FY 2014, 89% of bank transactions benefited small business exporters of U.S.-made goods and services. These are deals that could not and would not be done by the private sector alone, and are the perfect example of the kinds of public-private partnerships we need to continue to do in order to grow our economy. In my own district in northeastern Pennsylvania, the bank supports over $63 million in exports, benefiting 8 companies and over 400 jobs. For most of its 80 years, the Ex-Im Bank has received support from both Republicans and Democrats. In fact, Congress has consistently reauthorized this bank 16 times without fail. The bank's reauthorization is supported by a diverse coalition, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Waste and Recycling Association, and Air Products and Chemicals, Inc., which has 2 large plants in my district. But this year, a group I've referred to in the past as the shutdown crowd has decided to hold the bank's reauthorization hostage. Look, playing such a dangerous game is bad for American businesses, American exports, and most importantly, American jobs. Honest congressional oversight is an extremely effective tool for achieving government reforms. Today's hearing provides an opportunity effectively to examine the bank's efforts to strengthen its policies and procedures while holding the bank accountable for implementation of reforms and assuring the American public that this bank continues to contribute to our economy. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield 1 minute to our colleague, Mr. Heck, of the Financial Services Committee.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. That sound you hear in the background is the tick-tocking of the clock. There are, count them, exactly 32 legislative days until the Ex-Im Bank expires. And yet, it has been 1,394 days since the committee last held a markup on reauthorization. You don't have to be a math savant to figure that that's 3 years and 10 months for what was a 2-year reauthorization. Well, I welcome Chairman Huizenga's, albeit belated, attention to the most urgent legislative deadline before the Financial Services Committee. Bar none, no exception. There are 2 long-term reauthorization bills in the House. They have 250 sponsors between the 2 of them. There's a full majority of this committee that wants to pass it out. There's a full majority of the House that wants to pass it out. It's way past time to schedule a legislative markup on reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, period.
Thank you, Mr. Heck. Mr. Chairman, I hope today's hearing will highlight the good work of the Ex-Im Bank, resolve any outstanding questions concerning the 2012 reforms, and provide additional support for the bank's continuing reauthorization. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I actually hope for a different outcome. Today's hearing is exactly what the Oversight Committee is supposed to focus on. Frankly, what Congress is supposed to focus on: eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, things that have been going on at the Ex-Im Bank for a long, long time. The Export-Import Bank is little more than a fund for corporate welfare. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Senator Barack Obama in 2006. He was right. The bank was and is corrupt beyond repair, and everyone knows it, but 9 years later, the bank still exists. Why? The answer to that question represents the worst of politics. Every time the bank is up for reauthorization, deep-pocketed special interests and their friends on K Street descend on Washington with chicken little fables about how small businesses across America will suffer if the bank's charter is allowed to expire. The reality is that 99.9% of small businesses across America get no assistance from the Ex-Im Bank. The bank's beneficiaries are some of the largest companies in America. And I don't fault large companies. They're great. We're glad they're here. We're glad they do the great things they do in our economy, but they don't need middle-class taxpayers' help to succeed. And of course, one company has received most of the assistance from the bank, and that's Boeing. Many have called Ex-Im the bank of Boeing, and for good reason. In the last fiscal year, 40% of all authorized funds from the bank went to one company, Boeing. That's 1.5 times more support than received by all the small businesses combined. And the degree to which small businesses are actually small is not entirely clear. A November 2014 Reuters analysis revealed the bank listed companies owned by billionaires Warren Buffett and Mexico's Carlos Slim as small businesses. Besides big corporations who don't need the support, the other main beneficiaries are Ex-Im Bank employees themselves. Recently, Michael Whalen was hired by the bank as the Vice President of Structured Finance. He comes from Solar Reserve, which had a junk bond rating but still received $737 million taxpayer dollars from the Obama administration program that supported Solyndra and has been a candidate for Ex-Im financing. There's Tom Kiernan. He joined the bank's advisory committee earlier this year, and he's also chief executive of the American Wind Energy Association and represents many companies that have received Ex-Im support. The revolving door between Boeing and the government is especially troubling. Corey Golden, senior director at Boeing. Before that, he was a loan officer at the Export-Import Bank, overseeing relationships with foreign airlines. So now think about this. He worked for Ex-Im, which gives 40% of its financing to Boeing, and now he works for Boeing. Such a deal. There's also Bill Daley, who resigned from Boeing's board of directors in January 2011 to become White House Chief of Staff. and former Secretary of Commerce John Bryson, who left Boeing's board to join the Obama cabinet. In 2006, when then Senator Obama called the bank out for being a fund for corporate welfare, in 2012, the President spoke at a Boeing plant and joked that he deserved a gold watch because, quote, "I'm selling your stuff all the time." Corporate connectedness, corporate cronyism, and there's also just flat-out corruption at the Ex-Im Bank. Just yesterday, a former employee at the bank was indicted for bribery. Last summer, this committee held a hearing related to numerous investigations into fraud at the bank. 2 officials were accused of accepting gifts and kickbacks from companies seeking export financing. One of these employees, an official with significant responsibility over a decision to award taxpayer-backed export assistance, is accused of accepting cash payments from an applicant company. It's a nice way of saying bribes. 2 more officials were accused of improperly awarding contracts to favored companies. All 4 employees were referred to the Ex-Im Bank's Office of the Inspector General, and the investigation is currently being handled jointly by the IG and the Department of Justice. Given these issues, many have asked, is the bank fixable? In 2012, Congress engaged in the noble task of attempting to reform the dysfunction at the bank. Mr. Hochberg, I guess, and others this morning are likely to say that the bank has implemented the reforms. I respectfully disagree, and I think the GAO has some concerns about what they haven't done as well. The heart of the matter, however, is that the bank's very existence is anathema to free enterprise and American values. Members of Congress will face many difficult decisions and tough votes in the months and years ahead, but reauthorization of the Ex-Im Bank is not one of them. This is an easy call. This bank is corrupt, and it should be eliminated. It should be allowed to wind down in the natural course of events and not be reauthorized. And with that, I would yield back my time. And we will now recognize our witnesses. We thank you all again for being here. We'll start with Mr. Hochberg. Mr. Fred Hochberg is the Chairman and President of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. The Honorable Nathan Sheets is Undersecretary for International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Mr. Mike McCarthy, Acting Inspector General at the U.S. Export-Import Bank Office of the Inspector General. We have Mr. Mark Thorham, Assistant Inspector General for Inspections and Evaluations, and Ms. Kimberly Giannopoulos, Director, International Affairs and Trade Government Accountability Office. Again, welcome to all of you. We swear folks in here in this committee, so if you'll please stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give, is the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Hochberg, we'll start with you. You've all done this before. You get 5 minutes. You got the light system there or the clock in front of you. Try to keep it as close as you can because we have 5, and I think 4 of you are actually going to be making opening statements. So, Mr. Hochberg, you're recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman, ranking members, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the progress that Ex-Im has made over the past several years. In May of 2012, Ex-Im was reauthorized with overwhelming bipartisan support, 330 members in the House and 78 in the Senate. Since then, the bank has continued to support U.S. private sector job growth, including 164,000 jobs in the last year alone. We also generated revenue for the taxpayers, including $675 million we sent to Treasury for deficit reduction. Over the past 3 years, we have implemented each and every requirement called for in our 2012 reauthorization. In 2012, Congress required Ex-Im to do the following: submit a business plan and a textile report. Both were submitted in the fall of 2012. I have all these reports right here. Monitor and report default rates. We have issued 12 quarterly reports. Provide Federal Register notices for transactions exceeding $100 million. We have posted 88. Publish economic impact procedures and methodology. We updated and implemented new standards in April of 2013. Examine the bank's support for small business and issue a report. We submitted a report in November of 2012, and small businesses directly accounted for nearly 90% of all transactions and about 39% of the exports we financed by dollar value in 2014. Asked to include a textile representative on our advisory committee, a position now held by the president of Morrison Textiles of Fort Lawn, South Carolina. Develop a formal due diligence and know your customer standards for lender partners. Both were completed in May of 2014. Add a non-subordination requirement to our policy handbook. This was published in January of 2013. Categorized in the purpose of loans and guarantees. This is now included in our annual report. Review and report on our content policy. That was completed in May of 2013. Update and expand Iran sanctions certifications. That was completed in September of 2012. Update our IT systems. We've updated our computer hardware, software, and hired a new chief information officer. We've asked to provide a report on the implementation of GAO recommendations. That was completed in November of 2012. Congress required Treasury to negotiate an end to export credit financing. They have issued 3 annual reports to Congress on their progress. And finally, GAO and the IG were asked to do several studies, which they too completed. In my written testimony, I have further detailed how we've implemented all of these requirements. Having run a small business, I know how important it is to continually identify and become stronger and sleeker as an institution. The oversight provided by Congress, the IG, and the GAO has helped us to do just that. Since the 2012 reauthorization, GAO has submitted a total of 16 recommendations, and we agreed with all of them. Another part in our efforts to improve has been the IG, and I value the IG's role. I meet with him once a month, and in addition to our Chief Risk Officer, who meets with him far more frequently. Since 2012, the IG has issued 142 recommendations. EXIM fully concurs with 140, and we're working together on the last 2. Additionally, EXIM has proactively implemented risk management improvements to further ensure we remain faithful steward of taxpayer dollars. I'm just going to name 2. We increased staffing in our asset management division by 33%, and we implemented mandatory ethics training for all employees that goes well beyond federal requirements. Let me take a moment to thank our employees, the Inspector General, the Department of Justice, for the work they have done to expose and address an incident of improper activity at the bank, which was made public yesterday. Let me repeat, we have zero tolerance for waste, fraud, and abuse at EXIM. Our focus on risk management is demonstrated by a low default rate of 0.174% as of December 2014. While our transactions rarely default, when they do, claims are made by fees and interest paid by bank customers, not taxpayers. So in closing, let me add there are 59 other export credit agencies around the world aggressively fighting for jobs in their countries. While we consider past and future reforms, I trust the committee will keep in mind this global competition, and we appreciate the committee's interest and look forward to working with you to continue empowering your constituents to export more and hire more American workers. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sheets.
Chairman Jordan, Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Moore, Ranking Member Cartwright, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on efforts of the Treasury and the administration to discipline the use of government export financing. Treasury has been and continues to be guided by 3 core principles in this effort. First, there should be a level playing field for U.S. exporters, allowing them to compete based on the quality and price of their goods and services, rather than on the generosity of any government-supported financing. Second, China and other large emerging market economies, which now account for a major share of all official export financing, should participate in and abide by an international rules-based framework. And third, the terms and conditions of official export credits should be as market-oriented as possible to limit trade distortions and help ensure that this support complements rather than crowds out market financing. As we pursue these efforts, we recognize that curtailing U.S. export financing unilaterally could undermine our exporters' ability to compete, potentially causing them to lose business to foreign competitors whose governments continue to provide that support, as well as potentially resulting in the loss of American jobs. Moreover, unilateral action by the United States without similar moves by foreign governments could weaken our ability to negotiate more robust disciplines with counterparts abroad. Fundamental changes have occurred in the global export finance landscape over the past decade. Chief among them has been a dramatic increase in official export financing provided by China and other large emerging market economies that do not participate in the OECD's arrangement on officially supported export credits. Unless these countries operate within the international export credit framework, U.S. exporters could face an uneven playing field. Bringing all major providers of official export financing, including China and the large emerging market economies, into an international rules-based framework is an essential step. Consistent with this, we are making meaningful progress multilaterally through the International Working Group on Export Credits and bilaterally with China in our strategic and economic dialogue. Most recently, during President Obama's November 2014 visit, China committed to take all steps necessary to advance the IWG initiative and to support comprehensive guideline coverage. With respect to the aircraft sector, the United States has worked for years to make the international guidelines on official export financing more market-oriented. These efforts have led most recently to the 2011 aircraft sector understanding, which substantially improved on the previous understandings in a number of ways, the most important being adoption of a system for pricing borrower risk that adjusts quarterly in response to evolving market conditions. We believe that the market-oriented nature of the 2011 ASU has contributed to a meaningful decline in demand for official export financing for aircraft, even as the overall number of aircraft deliveries has increased. Since the 2011 ASU went fully into effect in 2013, we have seen both, one, a sharply falling proportion of large aircraft deliveries financed with official support globally, and two, a significant decline in Ex-Im Bank financing for U.S. exports of large aircraft. Even so, we will continue to explore opportunities to make additional progress. Now let me conclude. Since 2012, we have worked to discipline the use of government export financing support in a way that minimizes trade distortions, helps ensure that government export financing complements market financing, and contributes to a level playing field for U.S. stakeholders. In sum, progress, although sometimes incremental, is indeed being made, and achieving further gains is a top priority for Treasury and the administration in the period ahead. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to be here to present the work of the Export-Import Bank Office of Inspector General. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Thorem, who is the Assistant IG for Inspections and Evaluations. You have our written testimony, which highlights the work that our professional auditors, inspectors, and special agents have done to promote efficiency and detect and deter fraud at Ex-Im Bank. Let me briefly cover a few highlights. Every year, we review our work and identify the top management challenges facing the bank. Last fall, the OIG reported that the top challenge was managing risk, specifically managing the bank's core business activities to reduce the risk of loss to the Treasury and, by extension, the taxpayer. To manage that risk, we have recommended the bank should design an agency-wide risk management framework so that, in addition to rating the risk of any individual transaction, the bank is also evaluating and mitigating the risks generated by the overall composition of the portfolio, and any outsized exposures the bank has in certain regions, industry sectors, or single companies. To accomplish this, we have recommended a Chief Risk Officer, which the bank has established. The bank has also conducted stress testing and monitoring of exposure levels. We hope the bank will build on these steps by developing and implementing key risk policies covering both credit and non-credit risks. We have also recommended improvements to due diligence and know your customer policies, and the bank has deployed improvements in those areas. Finally, we have previously found that internal policies providing clear guidance to staff have not been prevalent at Ex-Im Bank, so we recommended that the bank rely more on clear policies, controls, and documentation, and less on institutional knowledge. Many of our recommendations have been for specific internal control policies, which the bank is working on implementing. Other critical challenges facing Ex-Im Bank are human capital management and information technology management. Without the ability to recruit and retain employees with the knowledge to execute complex financial transactions, and without an IT system that produces the data necessary to provide timely service, effectively manage and track programs, and conduct portfolio risk analysis, the bank will be held back from accomplishing its mission of financing U.S. exports and domestic jobs. The 2012 reauthorization legislation included several provisions to increase reporting and transparency for Ex-Im programs. We have summarized our relevant work on those provisions in the written testimony, and we are happy to answer questions on those topics. I know the committees are interested in issues of fraud and corruption as they affect Ex-Im Bank. Our investigative unit gets results in this area. Since 2009, OIG investigations have yielded 80 criminal indictments and informations, 47 convictions, $288 million in judgments, and 600 referrals of investigative intelligence back to the bank for enhanced due diligence. The most common fraud schemes that we have encountered involve outside parties obtaining loans or guarantees through false representations and submission of false documents. Generally, our caseload has been external, not internal, but last summer, the committee was interested in reports that Ex-Im Bank employees had been removed or suspended based on OIG investigations. At that time, we could not provide additional information, but have since reported back to the committees on 2 closed administrative cases. And earlier this week, the Justice Department filed a bribery charge against a former Ex-Im loan officer. This is part of an ongoing investigation and a pending court proceeding, so I hope you'll understand I'm unable to provide details beyond the public court documents on that particular case. We expect that more information will be available in the near future, and we will share that with Congress as soon as it is legal and appropriate to do so. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and we are happy to answer the members' questions.
Thank you. Did I understand correctly, Mr. Thorham, that you were not going to make an opening statement?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Ms. Giannopoulos, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Jordan and Huizenga, Ranking Members Cartwright and Moore, and members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss our recent work on the Export-Import Bank. Since the bank's 2012 reauthorization, GAO has issued several reports on the bank's operations. In my statement today, I will cover the following 3 areas. First, portfolio risk management. Second, underwriting and fraud prevention processes. And third, exposure, forecasting, and reporting on estimates of the bank's impact on U.S. jobs. First, I'd like to talk about our work related to the bank's portfolio risk management. In our reports dated March 2013 and May 2013, we identified a number of weaknesses related to loss estimation, vintage analysis, stress testing, sub-portfolio reporting, workload benchmarks, and resources for congressional mandates. For example, we found that the short-term forecasts the bank used to account for global economic changes could lead to underestimation of credit subsidy costs and loss reserves and allowances. We recommended that the bank assess whether it was using the best available data for adjusting its loss estimates. As a result, in November 2013, it incorporated a longer-term forecast of global economic change into its loss estimation model. Overall, with regard to portfolio risk management, All 6 recommendations we made have been closed as implemented. Additionally, while we did not make any recommendations in our July 2014 report on wide-body jets, we reported information about the bank's aircraft finance portfolio, as well as the financing by other export credit agencies of these aircraft. As of March 31, 2014, the bank's financial exposure in wide-body jets was $32 billion, representing about 28% of its overall financial exposure. The second area I'd like to discuss is the bank's underwriting and fraud prevention processes. In September 2014, we found that the bank implemented many key aspects of its underwriting process. However, we identified some weaknesses in this process, as well as related documentation issues. For example, the bank did not have procedures to ensure that applicants did not have delinquent federal debt. We also noted weaknesses in the bank's documentation of overall procedures related to fraud. Based on the bank's responses, we are taking steps to close 4 of the 6 recommendations as implemented, and we are reviewing the bank's response to the final 2 recommendations. In our August 2014 annual report on the bank's monitoring of exports with a dual civilian and military use, we found that the bank had financed 3 dual-use transactions in fiscal year 2012. However, we noted that the bank did not have complete and timely information about whether the items were actually being used in accordance with the terms of the agreements and bank policy. Therefore, we recommended that the bank establish steps for staff to take when borrowers do not submit required documentation within required timeframes, and to ensure that these efforts are well documented. We are in the midst of this year's review of the bank's dual-use monitoring, and we will assess the bank's progress in our upcoming report. Finally, in 2 reports issued during May 2013, we found weaknesses in both the bank's exposure forecasting and its reporting of jobs supported. With regard to exposure forecasting, we noted that the bank had not reassessed its forecasting assumptions to reflect changing conditions, nor had it conducted sensitivity analyses to assess and report the range of potential outcomes. In response, the bank put in place new methodologies and created statistical models to validate its forecasts, so we consider these recommendations closed. We noted that the bank had not reported the limitations in its calculations of the jobs supported by its financing. We recommended that the bank improve reporting on the assumptions and limitations in the methodology and data used. The bank's 2013 and 2014 annual reports included greater detail on these issues, and therefore we consider this recommendation closed. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I am happy to answer any questions the committees may have.
Thank you. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And actually, Ms. Giannopoulos, if I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. So based on 2014 report, you said that there was their portfolio was weighted to a 28% exposure to wide-body aircraft. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you believe that this bank could pass a Federal Reserve stress test?
I understand that the bank is engaged in stress testing of its portfolio now. I don't know what the current status is, whether it could pass those types of judgments. We haven't done work in that area.
Well, it seems to me portfolio risk, which has been identified multiple times, a lack of economic forecasting. You talk to any other bank, they have multiple models that are going forward, oftentimes getting castigated that they haven't added another or used a particular one. Ability to repay examinations. Have any of those things been done that you're aware of?
My understanding is that the bank has focused on its estimates for its potential losses, and that I know that there is some updates to the bank's processes with regard to both our recommendations and the IG's recommendations over the past few years since the reauthorization.
How about reserve funds?
I'm not aware of updates to the processes for reserve funds.
Well, I guess with the taxpayer guarantee, maybe they don't have to worry about reserve funds, which would be nice for some of the other banks. I'm sure that they would be interested in that. But, Mr. Sheets, I've a quick question for you as well. I think you aptly laid out in 2011 there was a, quote, understanding for a more orderly categorization or dealing with how these wide-body aircraft deals were moving forward. It strikes me that if this is a decline, I'd hate to see what an acceleration of those would be if we're 28% of the portfolio is already weighted to wide-body aircraft. But you didn't mention the 2012 directive in the reauthorization, which specifically said a discussion with the European Union about this particular situation. Why not? Why has that not been pursued? I think your mic needs to be on.
Thank you. The discussion has, in fact, been carried on with our European counterparts about wide-body aircraft.
But you didn't talk about that at all? Is that just an oversight?
I did briefly, but not with the same emphasis. At the end of last year, our lead negotiator spoke to counterparts from Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, which are the countries that are major competitors about the scope and
So just so I understand, so at the end of 2014, Treasury finally initiated that discussion?
I came to Treasury in 2014, but my understanding is that this has been an ongoing dialogue that we've had. And the major challenge we have is, at least so far, these foreign counterparts are not enthusiastic about moving this direction. But we are vigorously.
The interesting thing is I have a fair number of contacts in Europe in the legislative branches. They are interested in pursuing that as well. Europe is as, if not even more broke than the United States is, and I think that's absolutely imperative. Mr. Hochberg, early in my remaining minute and a half here, well, actually, before we do that, the OIG, Mr. Thorne, seems this might be falling into your category. You did an audit in 2012 of reauthorization, looking back at 2010 through 2012, prior to the requirements of the 2012 authorization. And according to your report on page 7, quote, we found that the loan files did not include sufficient documentation to substantiate the applicant's assertions for their need for Ex-Im Bank financing. At the time, Ex-Im Bank loan officers stated that the need for Ex-Im Bank financing was done through verbal and email communications, and detailed documentation was not required. I believe Mr. McCarthy had laid out that there had been some improvements. However, you also say at the top of that paragraph, this is the first full paragraph on page 7, OIG has not audited Ex-Im Bank's categorization and reporting of the purpose of loans and long-term loan guarantees required by the authorization. Why in the world not?
So we had the work.
My question is actually directed to Mr. Thorne, unless it's somehow more appropriate for you.
It's not his report. It's one of our audit reports, and
Okay.
he's responsible for inspection reports. So we did the direct loan, the direct loan audit, and that was based. It was after the 2012 reauthorization, but it was looking back at the 2010 to 2012 timeframe. So what we had in that report is we've had recommendations in order to put more.
So why have you not followed through on that as you were directed in 2012?
So in the 2012 reauthorization, we're continuing to review all of these internal control issues. We haven't looked at that.
That was nearly, it was 2.5 years ago. It would seem to me that if red flags went up from auditing what had happened in 2012 or 2010 through 2012, and you're directed to do audits of the categorization, which it appears are well off the mark, why not having done that now?
Well, I don't read that provision as requiring an OIG audit of that particular area. I believe it was a requirement for the bank reporting, and we're reviewing the bank reporting in that area and adding it to our risk-based audit planning.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hochberg, again, thank you for being here today. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the Ex-Im Bank and how it benefits Americans. The Export-Import Bank finances exports of U.S. products. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir.
And Ex-Im Bank financing helps U.S. companies compete in the global marketplace, does it not?
Correct, exactly.
Bank financing supports billions of dollars in exports by U.S. businesses and hundreds of thousands of American jobs. Am I correct in that?
Correct, 164,000 last year.
This is a bank that operates at no cost to the U.S. taxpayer, and in fiscal year 2014 actually generated a surplus to the tune of $674.7 million for U.S. taxpayers. Am I correct in that?
That is correct as well.
Now, the bank's default rate, I think you said in your testimony, was 0.174%. Did you say that?
That is correct.
Well, now, you probably heard my opening statement, and I said the bank's default rate was 0.175%. So I find that I have actually defamed you to the tune of 1/1000th of a percent, and to that very extent, I apologize, Mr. Hochberg. Is it 0.174%?
That was the default rate as of December 2014, and we report that to Congress every 90 days.
Well, my own view is this. It's hard to understand how reauthorizing this hugely successful part of our American government, something that benefits Americans to the extent you've described, and the U.S. economy the way it does, could even possibly be a controversial issue. But here we are. Some people choose to ignore these facts and risk creating a disadvantage for U.S. businesses, U.S. manufacturing companies, U.S. services seeking to compete in the global marketplace. But the efforts of the bank to reform and to comply with the GAO, by the way, the GAO is highly respected here in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Chairman Hochberg, the Ex-Im Bank has implemented how many of the requirements in the 2012 reauthorization? I think there were 18 requirements. How many were done?
I enumerated each and every one of them. We have complied with every one of the requirements of the 2012 reauthorization.
And the GAO has issued 5 reports since 2012 with 16 recommendations, 15 of which have been addressed, and the bank is working to address the one remaining recommendation. Am I correct in that?
That is correct.
The Ex-Im Bank Inspector General has made 142 recommendations, and of 142, how many has the Ex-Im Bank concurred with?
We have concurred with 140 of the 142. The last 2 were in discussion, ongoing conversations.
Good, and I think Mr. McCarthy mentioned that as well in his testimony. Well, let me ask you this. Has the bank been cooperative in working with GAO and also the IG on addressing concerns in unresolved recommendations, and can you explain what they are?
We have been working closely with the Inspector General. As I mentioned, I meet with the Inspector General once a month at a formal meeting, and our Chief Risk Officer meets with them more frequently. We have concurred with 140. There are 2 outstanding ones we're still in discussion on to find the right common ground so it's workable and also meets the needs of exporters and creating jobs. And with the Government Accountability Office, we concurred with all, and the last one we're still in discussion on. And that one was only issued last August, so it's a rather recent report from GAO.
Well, thank you, Chairman Hochberg. It's not clear what concerns exist with this bank's efforts to reform, but I do hope members today have learned of this bank's high performance in implementing reforms and have some assurance that the bank will continue to address oversight concerns that strengthen the bank's procedures and minimizes the risk of fraud or taxpayer losses. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hochberg, Secretary Sheets, let's talk for a moment again about this set of requirements in the 2012 reauthorization bill. And specifically, let's focus on the ones that have not been implemented yet. Could you expand on that? What we've not done yet, what you've not done yet to fully implement the 2012 reauthorization bill?
Addressing me?
Both of you, actually, since the requirements are placed on both the bank and on Treasury.
We have, I tried to outline each of the requirements that was set forth in 2012, and I gave a date on each one that we have either complied, sent a report, or changed our policies and procedures. So that's why, and I have copies of these reports here, default reports, competitiveness reports, reports on content, economic impact, Federal Register, and so forth.
So from your perspective, when will all of the requirements be implemented? since you say you're working diligently to implement them
Well,
all?
we have implemented the requirements of Congress. The work with the Government Accountability Office and the Inspector General will always be ongoing. As I mentioned, we got one report from GAO as recently as August. The IG, we have a large IG staff, so we're constantly getting recommendations, frankly, to make us a better bank, to make us operate better.
So, Chairman, you've implemented your requirements. Secretary, what about the requirements for Treasury in the 2012 reauthorization?
So as I articulated in my statement, we are working across a number of dimensions to implement the mandate, which we take extremely seriously. We, as I described, working with the International Working Group to bring in the emerging market economies, working with XM to vigorously implement the ASU, which has reduced the quantity of export credit significantly. So we feel that we are on a convergent path consistent with the mandate.
So, Secretary, since part of that, I think what most of the members would refer to as Section 11 requirement, how much enthusiasm truly do you have from your colleagues around the world about doing something in reference to their, 24 or so of these institutions?
At this stage, the negotiations in the International Working Group, which I really see as being a key part of what we're doing here, trying to bring in the emerging market economies, which are increasingly important providers of export credits, that these are tough, ongoing negotiations. For many of these countries, they have not been in negotiations regarding export credits before. And as a result of this, these negotiations are slow, but we're making progress.
So our competitors around the world at this point are willing to talk about it, but nobody's taken any concrete action in stepping away from these kind of programs?
To be clear, the advanced economies that are members of the OECD are bound by the OECD understanding and are operating with similar rules. But the objective of the IWG is for the emerging markets to bring them in. And we're negotiating with them through the IWG, but this is also a subject of vigorous bilateral negotiation. As I mentioned in the SNED, when President Obama was recently in China, so we're making progress.
But, Mr. Secretary, aren't some of the largest economic players in this non-OECD members, say the Chinese perhaps, when it comes to sheer amount of resources they can throw in the fight, the way they play the competitive game?
Yes, sir. That's why we are engaged in this new process, the IWG, which is intended to expand the periphery of countries that are bound by these export credit understandings.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I would just note to my colleagues in what little remaining time I have, perhaps I have a perspective slightly different than a number of my friends on both sides of the room. But if the biggest economic players refuse to step back from this kind of a system, I have a real hesitation about giving the field away. I have a real hesitation about that. And I would say that at some point this year, this issue will be addressed legislatively. And I would encourage my colleagues, reform is the key. We have to make reforms. But this is an institution we will be voting on before this year is out. Let's take advantage of this opportunity, a discussion about ending something that none of our competitors are willing to do doesn't seem like the rational economic choice. Yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I once again want to thank all of the witnesses for appearing. And it seems to me, based on all the testimony I have heard, is that the Ex-Im Bank has really worked very diligently and effectively at adhering to the 2012 mandates. I do have a question, though, for you, Mr. McCarthy. I would hope that you would return to Wisconsin at some point to engage in your birthplace's stuff, but that's not why we're here today. But I would hope that you would do that. I have been very impressed. I was impressed with your testimony with regard to the extent that the IG has looked into the operations of the Ex-Im Bank, even to the point that they have, that there's now been an indictment of an Ex-Im employee. Sure wish that you guys had gotten to HSBC of their money laundering, drug dealers, the London Well, and stopped the 2008 crisis, but at least we got this one Ex-Im employee. I guess we have heard a lot of testimony that the Ex-Im Bank has shown favoritism for projects based on political connections and electoral politics. So I was wondering if you discovered any of that in your investigations.
So generally,
Crony capitalism.
Generally, our investigations have been of outside parties perpetrating fraud and money laundering schemes against the bank. We haven't reviewed specific allegations that we've received in specific cases of there was some type of undue political influence or things of that nature.
You have not found that?
We've not found that. Now, we do emphasize is that the bank needs to make sure that it has in place the appropriate internal controls to make sure that things like that can't happen. If you have the proper policies in place, if you have separations of duties among employees, if you have procedures in place, it lessens the risk for that type of undue influence and also fraud cases.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Mr. Sheets from Treasury, again, I want to thank you for your due diligence. You're currently negotiating with other countries to limit or end export credit. Were we not to reauthorize the bank on the 30th of June, as some members of our body would like, do you think that countries like Korea or China will voluntarily end their credit support programs? The other, what is it, 59 countries are, you know, if we were just to disappear from this space?
I think that would be very unlikely. And indeed, if we were to unilaterally curtail, I think that there is a risk, as I've indicated, that in negotiations going forward, we will have less leverage because we won't have anything to give in those negotiations. So I think it's important both from a level playing field standpoint that we remain engaged on this, but also if our ultimate goal is to further discipline export credits, a unilateral curtailment would very likely move in the opposite
Would it be
direction
catastrophic? Those are my words.
from a global standpoint.
Would it be catastrophic to our economy?
I think it would be very negative and adverse. How we define catastrophic.
All right.
Certainly
Well,
be
that's my
catastrophic
definition. I'm
for
from
some parts.
Milwaukee, and so we're the manufacturers of the world. Boeing, all these people have issues with it. Boeing doesn't make any screws and bolts and nuts, and they come from Milwaukee. Small businesses. We've heard that 99% of the small businesses don't use Ex-Im Bank, but isn't it true that 89% of the loans you guys make are to small businesses, Mr. Hochberg?
Yes, they are.
Okay. What do you mean, Mr. Hochberg, when you say that the operations of the bank are demand-driven, and how do you supplement private finance? Can you walk us through that?
Certainly. Demand-driven is that companies come to us. For example, you and I visited Maxon Industries in Wisconsin. There's a company that makes construction equipment. They come to us when they're trying to sell overseas and can't get financing locally, or their competitors overseas have government-backed loans, so they want to make sure they're on a level playing field. So when I say demand-driven, they come to us, they seek us out only when they need us, and we can fill in a gap that the private...
And you know, Maxim has 30 employees, and they've worked on projects like the Panama Canal with 30 employees in Milwaukee. Thank you, and I yield back.
Just before we recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, I just want to clarification on an answer. The gentlelady talked about undue political influence. Mr. McCarthy, did you say you have not found that or you've not looked into that?
I'm saying that we haven't received specific allegations that we've substantiated on that. We're always happy to look.
So you've not looked into it? You don't know?
From time to time, we've looked into various allegations.
Well, which is it? You have looked into it or you haven't looked into it?
We've looked into it from time to time, but we have not substantiated it.
Okay. Thank the gentleman. Gentleman.
Mr. Hochberg, for the benefit of my colleagues who have not had the pleasure before of sitting in on our discussions, I thought I'd review and summarize some of the previous testimony. You know I've gone over when you've been here as quickly as I can. Mr. Cartwright mentioned the low default rate at the Export-Import Bank. You all still have $36 million worth of pre-Castro Cuban debt on the books, don't you, as a performing loan? The answer to that is yes, you still have it. And my guess is we probably didn't address it when we changed normalized relations, but it's still on the books as a good loan. You talk about the 164,000 jobs that the bank supposedly supports. It's always an interesting use of language, doesn't create, it supports. You still don't have any clue as to how many of those are actually in the United States, do you?
All of those jobs are in the United States, sir.
The GAO has said on several occasions that the method by which you count jobs does not adequately account for the jobs of the foreign components of American exports.
We actually only look at the U.S. content, and as a result of that, adjust our jobs numbers, which we receive. We use data from the Bureau of Labor.
You have no idea how many of those jobs would cease to exist if the bank is not reauthorized, do you?
No, I would differ with you on that. Companies come to us like Maxon Industries I just mentioned when they can't
How many
get
would
financing.
cease to exist?
Every application makes a statement in the application.
How
that
many
they
of the
cannot get it.
164,000 jobs that you say you support would cease to exist if the bank is not reauthorized? You don't know the answer.
I would say all of them, because the application requires you to state that you have come to us as the length of last
I'll accept
resort.
all of them as an answer. I'll disagree with it. You don't know how many jobs you destroyed, do you? You were here previously and heard testimony from Delta Airlines that you destroyed 7,500 jobs at Delta. You don't count that in your 164,000, do you?
We actually we do an economic impact study, sir, that is required by law.
You've done one of those on an airplane sale in the last 20 years. How can you say that you do that?
We review every single transaction for economic impact, and when warranted, we do an in-depth study.
Once in the last 20 years. The GAO report said that one of the shortcomings they found in the bank a few years ago was that when a third-party lender gets involved on an export-import bank guaranteed loan, they don't do adequate credit checks. They stop doing the credit checks. If Boeing is going to sell an airline to Ethiopia, that the bank doesn't look at the credit of Ethiopia because they simply rely on the government guarantee. You were supposed to fix that a couple years ago. That's one of the things you haven't fixed yet, have you?
We do a full underwriting. You use an example of Ethiopian Airways, which, by the way, supports thousands and thousands of U.S. jobs, including many small businesses in the Boeing supply chain. But
the checklist,
we do a full and complete financial review and underwriting of every trip. We do not rely on any outside source. We do it ourselves.
the checklist that the IG or the GAO is required or requested you to do is one of the things that remains unfinished at the bank, isn't it?
I mentioned to you we
The
have
answer to that question is also yes. The IG report in June of last year said that you can't account, this is a new one for me, you can't account for $500 million worth of costs on a PNG liquefied natural gas project?
If you'd like me to answer the question, I'd be happy to answer the question.
Can you account for the $500 million?
What we do, as an example, we make an export, we finance an export. Some of those exports require local cost. In this case, ExxonMobil was the exporter. The project certified that there was $500 million local cost, which was authorized and approved. And so there is full certification from the project sponsor that the monies was indeed incurred and spent for this project.
So the IG is just wrong on that one.
The IG doesn't like some of the documentation we have.
Speaking of documentation, the last one on my list, Mr. Hochberg, and then I'm finished with you, and I know you're excited about that, was that—
I always like talking to you.
I know, and we always enjoy this, is that one of the places you fall short on documentation, I found this one to be interesting. One of the places they cited you was that you don't do a very good job of documenting why companies ask for export-import bank participation. Why is that?
No, companies come to us, like I gave an example of Maxon Industries, or I gave a number of examples here.
I understand they come to you, but the IG says you don't document that. Why don't you document that?
No, companies have to certify on their application that they need us, and why do they need us? Because they can't get that loan.
So, Mr. McCarthy, why did you cite them for that particular shortcoming?
So in the previous direct loan program audit that we did in 2012, we did find there was not documentation in the file supporting the reason for the company needing EXIM financing, and so we made recommendations, and the bank has modified its procedures.
Mr. Sheets, you were the lucky one here, because I was hoping to handle Mr. Hochberg in 2 minutes and give my other 3 minutes to you, sir, and go over some of the discussions with our competitors overseas on wide-body aircraft financing. But I'm out of time, so I thank the Chairman, and I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to read something to you, Mr. Hochberg, and I'd like you to tell me whether or not this is a true statement. Although the reliance on Ex-Im Bank has diminished slightly over the last year amid a growing economy and improvements in the availability of private sector financing, the bank still plays a vital role for thousands of U.S. businesses and their workers. In FY 2014 alone, the bank authorized $20.5 billion of financing in support of $27.5 billion worth of U.S. exporters and more than 164,000 U.S. jobs. Of the bank's 3,700 authorizations in 2014, more than 3,300, nearly 90%, directly served small U.S. businesses. Furthermore, roughly 1 in 5 authorizations completed last year directly served women or minority-owned businesses. As noted above, the bank operates on a self-sustaining basis. To cover the cost of its operations, Ex-Im Bank charges users a fee, which over the past 2 decades has generated a surplus, resulting in payments of $6.9 billion to the U.S. Treasury. Last year alone, the bank generated a surplus of $674.7 million for U.S. taxpayers. This directly results in U.S. deficit reduction. In other words, the failure to reauthorize the bank would actually cost the government money. Is that a yes or no?
That would be a yes.
To the department, the Treasury Department, to the IG, and to the GAO. While I recognize that there were many findings that the bank had deficiencies in operations and accountability and those kinds of things, it seemed to me from your testimony that you've been working with the bank in a very cooperative manner and that it is, in fact, addressing, redressing, and moving forward with those recommendations primarily that have been found and made. Is that a yes or no?
So in terms of the IG recommendations, we've broken it out into the more recent recommendations versus the ones that have been outstanding for 6 months or longer, so prior to October 2014. And the number on the older recommendations that we have, and there's maybe a discrepancy of 1 or 2 between what Mr. Hochberg is reporting just on, because it changes by the day. At that point, we were reporting that there are still 29 open and 2 unresolved recommendations, as opposed to 78 that have been closed out of the older ones. Of the newer ones, there are more that are still open because some of those reports have just been issued within the last several weeks.
Okay, thank you.
And with regard to the GAO recommendations, 13 of those 16 recommendations have been closed as implemented officially. 2 of the recommendations, we've gotten responses from the bank, and we're on the road to closing those imminently. And then that final recommendation is from our report of last August, and we're working with the bank on addressing that.
So I've sat in a lot of hearings where we've had the Inspector General and the GAO speak to issues regarding departments, and this actually is the first time where I've seen so much what seems to be supportive language that the entity that is under discussion is moving in the right direction. This is to Mr. Sheets from the Department of Treasury. If the bank isn't authorized, how will it disadvantage U.S. businesses' ability to compete in the global market? And what are some of the potential consequences of a unilateral action to end U.S. export financing?
So my sense strongly is that unilateral curtailment of export credits would play very adversely for the U.S. economy, for U.S. jobs, for U.S. workers. Is essentially what we'd be doing is competing in a world where other countries are providing these credits. And even if our goods and services were of comparable quality or even better, it may be economically advantageous for our buyers in our export markets to buy foreign products. So I think it would be very, very adverse for the U.S. economy and for U.S.
Thank you.
workers.
I'd just like to note that from my very small but important district of the 12th District in New Jersey, there is a total export value of $765 million. That sounds like a lot of money to me and in my district. And I think that we can look at things, that old adage, you see them half full or half empty. Well, I believe that if we look at this in a very realistic way, we'll see that there's a half-full opportunity here to support the economic growth in the state of New Jersey and jobs, and that we should also be held to the same standards, whether we're asking questions or answering questions or making statements, that we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the lady. Mr. McCarthy, who's Johnny Gutierrez?
Johnny Gutierrez is a former Ex-Im Bank loan officer.
And is Mr. Gutierrez was under investigation by the Inspector General's office and the Department of Justice?
So I can report what's been filed in the public court documents, which you referenced. On Monday, the Justice Department filed a one-count information alleging that Mr. Gutierrez accepted bribes in violation.
The Justice Department indicted Mr. Gutierrez this week?
They filed an information which is the equivalent of an indictment.
According to the court filing, Mr. Gutierrez on, quote, 19 separate occasions personally and corruptly sought and accepted things of personal value, i.e. money from another person and entity in return for being influenced in the performance of his official acts, and these occurred between 2006 and 2013. Is that accurate?
That's what the information alleges.
So this started in 2016, and he was indicted when?
On Monday.
On Monday, 2015?
That's correct.
And is there any coincidence to the fact that he was indicted 2 days before this hearing, or did that just happen?
Mr. Chairman, that did just happen. That's a coincidence. This was in process prior to the hearing.
Starts stealing, taking bribes in 2006, gets indicted 2 days before a big hearing.
The process was in place
9 years
prior to
later.
the hearing being announced. DOJ makes these decisions. They will tell you that their charging decisions are not affected by the congressional calendar.
That's fine. Mr. Hochberg, back in 2006, when Mr. Gutierrez was first starting to take bribes as an employee at your bank, the President, then Senator, said the Export-Import Bank is little more than a fund for corporate welfare. Was he wrong?
Yes, that was, people say things in campaigns, they say different things when they're in office. So I'm not going to comment on what was motivating then Senator Barack Obama.
Well, that's the understatement of the year there for this administration. Thank you. Mr. Hochberg, who is Diane Farrell?
Diane Farrell was a former director of the bank that was nominated by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Director of the bank means she was on your board?
Correct.
How long was she on your board?
Her time precedes mine, so I can't tell you precisely.
Well, how long have you been there?
I've been there, this May will be 6 years.
Well, my understanding, she was on the board for 8 years between 2007 and 2015. That doesn't seem like it precedes you.
She was not, no. Her term was up, I believe, in 2011.
When you've been there 6 years, if I do the math, that means there was some overlap.
Oh, of course. I didn't say, yes. I thought you asked me, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
No, you said she was there before you were.
She was there before I was.
Yeah.
I arrived in 2009. She arrived sometime before.
You served together is what I'm getting at.
Oh, yes, of course.
Your answer seemed to say that you didn't.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you.
Where is she currently employed?
She is, my recollection, she's at the U.S. Indian American Chamber.
And do you know if she's on the board of Azure Power?
I have no recollection.
My understanding that she is. And do you know, did Azure Power benefit from any financing from the Export-Import Bank?
Azure Power is a solar development company in India that has been a purchaser of U.S. goods, and we have financed some of their projects.
You have financed some of their projects. So the lady who was on your board is now working for a company that you finance projects for.
It's long after she left the Export-Import Bank.
Well, she just recently left the Export-Import Bank,
She
right?
left the Export-Import Bank, as I mentioned, sometime in 2011.
Okay. And did Ms. Farrell work on any loans that are now benefiting the employer she is with, the Indian company and that association?
I would not be able to answer.
Could you get us that answer? That's important.
We can get you that answer. I don't know off the top of my head what transaction she voted on during her time as a board member.
Okay. And do you know what Ms. Farrell's, where Ms. Farrell's husband is employed? Do you happen to know?
No, I don't know.
He's employed at Boeing. Does that cause any concern?
Actually, now that you refer, when Ms. Farrell was on the board and her husband was at Boeing, she was recused from all transactions.
Well, that's nice. We'd expect that. I'm just making the point that she's working for the Export-Import Bank, giving loans to companies, the Export-Import Bank giving loans and financing to companies she now works for, and also while she's on the board at the Export-Import Bank, her husband works for Boeing, which gets 40% of the financing from the Export-Import Bank. Now, how do you think the normal taxpayer looks at that arrangement?
I'll have to leave that to you, sir, but.
Well, I can tell
as I
you, because
mentioned,
they
she
talk to me
recused-
about things. This is the part of government that just drives them crazy. This kind of coziness, this kind of closeness, this kind of connectedness drives them crazy. You got, she's on the board, her husband's working at Boeing, and you say, oh, she recuses herself from those decisions, but 40% of all the financing goes to one company that her husband's on the board, and oh, by the way, a company that got $15 million of export-import financing, she goes to work for after the board approved the $15 million in financing to Azure Power. You don't find that a little strange?
Well, first of all, Congressman, none of the financing we do goes to Boeing. It goes to overseas customers that buy U.S. products. We don't lend money to the Boeing Corporation.
Okay, well, all right, so I was mistaken. All those people who come talk to me from Boeing, lobbyists who represent Boeing, they don't really care that much about the Export-Import Bank then? You say it's not important to them?
We're talking about customers, overseas customers, that have a choice, Congressman, between buying a Boeing airplane and an Airbus airplane. If we're looking at
So all the
jobs,
lobbying Boeing's doing is just out of the goodness of their heart to help those overseas customers, right?
we're looking about jobs, and we're talking about jobs in America, jobs in Toulouse, France, or Hamburg, Germany.
All right. My time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. I really don't have a lot of questions. I have worked very closely with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the National Foreign Trade Council, the National Association of Manufacturers. I have met with some of the businesses that are beneficiaries of the Ex-Im Bank. I've met with Mr. Hochberg. I have met with my local chambers. I have tremendous support from the California Chamber of Commerce, and I know the Export-Import Bank pretty well. I've spent a lot of time learning about what they do and how they do it, and I'm convinced of the high performance, the excellent default rate, the support for both large and small businesses and their suppliers, and I have a real appreciation for their job creation that they are doing. And so I don't have any questions. I mean, I think, you know, there has been representations over and over again from both sides of the aisle from various times about this bank and the importance of this bank. But I think I should use this time to get a little mean and to talk about, you know, the way that this bank is being unfairly attacked. First of all, yes, this article, Justice Department charges former Export-Import Bank official with bribery. Well, we don't support people committing crime or doing bad things, but do we want to shut down the Export-Import Bank because we have a person or a few persons who have acted improperly? I don't think so, because if we did that, I would have to say this. Republicans have said that individual acts of fraud or corruption at Ex-Im Bank proves that there is systemic fraud and corruption throughout the bank, and for this reason, among others, the bank should be closed. Let me give you some examples of fraud, corruption, and abuse of the public trust at an institution very close and dear to most people here today. Since 1981, talking about the Congress of the United States of America. 1981, 1989, under Reagan administration, 10 members were convicted of bribery and conspiracy. 1 member convicted of perjury. 1989 to 1993, under Bush, 1 member convicted of accepting illegal gifts. 1 member convicted of bribery. Under Clinton, 1 member convicted of bribery, 1 member convicted of tax evasion and extortion, 2 members convicted of embezzlement. Under George Bush, W. Bush, 2001, 2009, 2 members were convicted of bribery, 1 member convicted of money laundering, 1 member convicted of financial corruption. Under the Obama administration, 2 members were convicted of wire fraud, extorting, or money laundering, 1 member convicted of tax evasion. Does anyone believe that these individual instances of corruption by bad actors point to systemic corruption throughout the Congress? And I also wonder if any Republican members support shutting the House down. I don't think so. Let us take a look at what has not been done. We bailed out the biggest banks in this country. I have 15 pages of fines that have been leveled on the banks, many of whom we bailed out, from everything from market manipulation to money laundering to lending consumer practices, mortgage-backed securities fraud, on and on and on and on. We have not had one hearing, not one hearing on any of this. But yet we come here today and we have Mr. Mulvaney talking about you didn't properly do credit checks. Mr. Mulvaney, have you ever heard of no documentation loans, no credit checks that were done by the biggest banks of America who brought us down in a subprime?
Would the gentlelady yield?
No, I won't yield.
Well, you
It's my
mentioned me
time.
by name. I thought I'd ask you.
And so, let me just say that this business of talking about this very important institution would be closed down for all of these phony reasons really is something that I cannot take seriously and the American public cannot take seriously. And I think it was you who also said something about our citizens perhaps should be very, very disappointed with us. Oh, no, here's what you said. How does the average taxpayer look at us? You're right. How do they look at us? How do they look at us that would attack a bank that not only is helping us to deal with building up and expanding our ability to support exports and businesses and create jobs, and then have members sit here who have not said one word about what has happened in America with banks who are accused of and have been fined for all of these crimes. And you ask, how should our citizens think about us? I would think they think we have no credibility, and this must be political. This must be about someone who's attempting to create something that they can accuse Democrats of and make it look as if they're taking care of the taxpayers in some extraordinary way, and it doesn't wash. I yield back the balance of my time.
I would just remind the lady that many of us didn't vote to bail out the banks. The Constitution requires a House of Representatives. It doesn't require a export-import bank. And the most well-known case of a congressperson getting in trouble was the cash in the freezer of Mr. Jefferson, which was related to the export-import bank.
It doesn't measure up to the acts that have been committed
With that,
by
I would
members of
recognize
Congress.
the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Chaffetz.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Hochberg, how many employees at the bank?
About 450.
And how many of those would be loan officers?
I would have to say in the range of maybe 75.
And will you provide this committee a listing of, when you say 450, an organizational chart as well as how many you have in each of these slots?
We'd be happy to do so.
Thank you. I would appreciate it. You're aware of the Washington Examiner story that alleges that the bank may have tipped off Boeing about a Freedom of Information Act request that was put forward by Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines had made a FOIA request, but they did not publicize it, and yet it was revealed that Boeing knew to ask for pretty much the exact same information 2 months before that information became public. How could that be?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I don't have an answer. I do tell you.
Are you familiar with the article of March 19th?
I'm vaguely aware of the article, yes, I am.
So there's an article saying who at the Export-Import Bank warned Boeing about a Delta FOIA, and you're just vaguely familiar with that?
Well, what I can say, sir, is that no employee reveals the source.
How do you know that?
We run an ethical organization, and that's what, and people.
You do have more than
that.
31 open investigations into fraud and abuse in your organization. You did have somebody who was just indicted yesterday. So what's the case to say that you run an ethical organization?
The 31, sir, are outside companies that are trying to defraud the Export-Import Bank.
Mr. McCarthy, do you have any open investigations?
Most of the 31 open, we have about 31 open investigations right now. Most of them are for external fraud. Some of them are proactive, intelligence-based investigations, and some of them are internal to the bank.
So some of them are internal. So I would take exception to the idea that you run the most ethical organization. As Mr. Mulvaney cited, we have had problems with this bank in the past, and we did just have an indictment yesterday, in this week. How much did you charge Delta Airlines for their FOIA request?
I don't know the precise fees we charge. I can say this, Congressman.
Have you fulfilled that FOIA request?
Yes, we have fulfilled that one. And let me just add, if I can.
There was more than one. How much have you charged Delta Airlines to gather information that they're rightfully they should be able to see?
I will have to get back to you. I don't know the precise.
Would it be $90,000?
I don't know the charge. I can say.
Is that a wrong number? Is it more than $90,000?
I don't know the number, sir. I don't want to mislead.
When will you give us the number?
I can check and I'll get back to you on that.
When will you get back to us?
I will have to ask my counsel how ready we have that information. I can get that to you tomorrow.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And I can
Of
add,
the FOIA requests that were issued by Delta, how much of that have you fulfilled? Have you given them 100%? Because part of the concern is that you've charged them and taken their $90,000 plus, but you haven't fulfilled the FOIA request.
Congressman, I don't want to mislead you. I don't want to mislead the committee. I don't have the precise facts on that particular FOIA request. I can add, however, that the law requires when we have a FOIA request, we need to inform the company whose information we're revealing. So that's why Boeing was aware of that FOIA request, because it was their information that was being submitted to Delta.
But how is, are you going to provide this committee the details of that specific instance?
You asked about this.
There are a couple different FOIAs, but I want to see the information about how did Boeing know in advance, when it wasn't public, that they knew 2 months in advance to submit their own FOIA for the same material?
What I tried to explain is it's my understanding of the law, I'm not a lawyer, that we must inform the company about whose information we are providing in a FOIA request.
And part of the question is, did you fulfill that FOIA request? Because I want additional details. I've got 30 seconds.
We have fulfilled that FOIA request.
There was more than one FOIA request, is my understanding. The Wall Street Journal reported that in the drafting of regulations related to this, that they had an, quote, extraordinary level of coordination. How do you quantify the level of coordination with Boeing in relationship to the drafting of the regulations?
Congressman, we work with every company when we're doing regulations requirements that concern a particular company. So in the case of Boeing, we happen to have one aircraft company, so we talk to the one aircraft company. When we're doing banking regulations and how we work our bank, we talk to multiple banks.
When's the last time you spoke with Boeing?
Last time I spoke with Boeing?
Yeah.
They're in the room today.
So did you speak with them today?
I said hello. I said good morning.
When did you have the last time you had a substantive conversation with them?
I was in Panama with President Obama, and we signed, Boeing signed an agreement with Copa Airlines.
And what was the value of that?
A list value of about $6.6 billion.
I've gone past my time. Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Heck, gentleman from Washington. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hochberg, could you quickly restate for the record what your default rate is?
Yes, our default rate is 0.174%, and it's something we send to Congress every 90 days to make sure that Congress is apprised of the state of our portfolio.
To the best of your ability, could you compare that default rate to the rest of the commercial lending sector that operates in this same space?
Hard to get a precise benchmark, but it is, from my understanding, 2 to 3 times lower than general commercial loans.
To the best of your recollection, could you state for the record what your collection rate is on bad debt?
Well, it's partly reflected in our default rate, again, of 0.174%. And when something has gone in arrears, we have generally been collecting about 50 cents on the dollar.
And can you compare that to the rest of the commercial lending?
I don't have a precise benchmark for that, but my understanding is it's very much on the high side.
Do you recall off the top of your head the last year, or are you aware of the last year in which there was an actual transfer of taxpayer money to the Export-Import Bank in the form of a subsidy?
There has been none. We have transferred to Treasury $6.9 billion in the last 2 decades, and most recently in October of this past year, $675 million.
I was asking for the reverse transfer. When's the last time you received a subsidy, and are you aware that there have been any subsidies since the enactment of the 1990 Credit Reform Act?
There have been none.
Mr. Hochberg, you know that I've expended no small amount of time on this effort. I'm just one of many, as has my friend Congressman Fincher from Tennessee and others. We've met with you multiple times. We've met with the Majority Whip's office, the Chair's office, the Chair of the ranking member of the subcommittees, and I meant the ranking member, not the Chair, in an effort to develop legislation. Have you or any members of your office met with Chairman Huizenga of the subcommittee to develop or respond to or react to proposed changes and or reforms for reauthorization purposes?
No, I have not.
Mr. Hochberg, difficult question, a permutation on some of the line of questioning of Ranking Member Waters. Sir, do you believe that Congressman Aaron Schock's resignation and shame from this institution is a reflection on the entire House Republican Conference?
No, I would say not.
I don't either. Mr. Chair, or rather Mr. Hochberg, are you aware that China is developing a wide-body aircraft for sale into the commercial market in competition with both Boeing and Airbus?
Well, I have met actually with COMAC, which is the Chinese aircraft manufacturer. They already have 400 orders for a narrow body, and there have been reports they're working with the Russian aerospace industry to develop a wide body also to compete with Boeing and Airbus.
There have been reports to that effect. Do you believe it to be the case?
Oh, I have no reason not to believe it. As I said, I personally met with the CEO of the Chinese aircraft company, so I would have a firsthand impression of their activities.
So lastly, Mr. Hochberg, would you give us a little bit of information about how much larger the Export Credit Authority is in China? As a matter of fact, I think they have multiple entities, but educate us. How many Export Credit Authorities do they have? And aggregating them, how do they compare in size to the Export-Import Bank?
Well, for one, China, as we know, is not the most transparent country in terms of its banking and financial dealings. They have 4 entities that provide export support. Sinosure, which is the essentially provides credit insurance. That alone has been about $670 billion in the last 2 years. They also have the China Exim Bank. Informally, speaking with that chairman, they operate between $90 and $100 billion a year. There's the China Development Bank, and then there's a Chinese Agriculture Bank. So there are 4 entities that do that.
I lied. I got 2 more quick ones. First of all, yes or no, if you can, are we already losing business as a consequence of the cloud hanging over reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank?
Without question.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to request for entry into the record a letter from multiple governors, both political parties throughout this country, in support of reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir.
That will be put into the record. I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman. I must start off saying that I've been somewhat amused by my friends on the other side of the aisle who decry the lack of hearings on XM and then say they are simultaneously a waste of time, but just for the record, Mr. Chairman, is this a hearing?
It most certainly is.
Okay, we're in the midst of a hearing. Mr. Hochberg, according to XM records, of the 50 largest loans or guarantees provided by XM, I believe this was on your watch through the end of FY 2014, roughly half have gone to state-owned companies or joint ventures that include state-owned companies, including Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, Pakistan, India, Colombia, Mexico, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Poland. Do you agree with that analysis? Hit your microphone.
I haven't seen the data you're looking at, but those names sound familiar.
Okay. Again, these are state-owned companies or joint ventures that include state-owned companies. There's been discussion of losing jobs to China. On your watch in 2011, the Exim Bank records show that a $75.8 million loan was approved to a Chinese company, ICBC Financial Leasing. Its parent company is the state-owned Industrial Commercial Bank of China, the largest bank in the world with reported assets of $3 trillion. Are your records correct? Did that transaction take place?
Congressman, my recollection is we approved that authorization, but there was never a disbursement. They changed their mind on that transaction.
Okay, let's talk about Russia. It is my understanding, from perusing XM records, that on your watch, taxpayer-backed financing to Russia has increased roughly tenfold, from roughly $60 million to $600 million. Is that accurate?
I'm not looking at the precise data, but we no longer do any business in Russia.
Well, I know you don't, because I sent you a letter after Russia had invaded the Ukraine. And if memory serves me correct, that was February 27th of 2014, and it took you until July 29th, I guess the math, many months later, before you and the Exim Bank suspended all deals with Russia. Is July 29th, according to press reports, the date that you suspended all deals with Russia, and is it not true that Russia invaded the Ukraine on February 27th?
I would have to get back to the precise date we stopped doing. We put a hold on.
Okay, well, I will let you know, Mr. Hochberg, there are numerous press reports that show that it took you months in order to do that. In February of this year, there were press reports that indicated that a $2 million direct export-import bank loan to Ghana that was designed to bring electricity to 1,200 rural communities was instead diverted to buy luxury automobiles by various foreign government bureaucrats, including Lexus SUVs. Are you familiar with this press report, and if so, is it accurate?
I'm familiar with a company that's done a lot of electrical work in Ghana, Weldy Lamont. In fact, they have done such a good job that they've expanded their contract there. I'm not familiar with what.
So you're not familiar with this?
No, I'm not, sir.
Okay. In September of 2013, the Exim Bank approved a $33.6 million loan for a Spanish green energy company, Abengoa International. At the time, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson sat on the advisory board for both XM and this particular company. Are the records correct? Did XM approve this loan?
I can confirm that. That sounds familiar to me, sir.
Okay, Mr. Hochberg, approximately how many days a month do you travel away from the Export-Import Bank?
I'm probably on the road, if I had to guess, about 8 days a month.
8 days a
7 or 8
month.
days a month.
And do you know, over the last year, how many appearances that you made in congressional districts with members of Congress?
I traveled around the country meeting with small business exporters. I mentioned when I was with Gwen Moore and the Maxon Company. I was most recently.
Are you meeting with them, or are you lobbying for your reauthorization?
No, I'm meeting with companies and finding better ways that we can support them, so support more American jobs. a meeting since 90% of our customers are small businesses.
Well, Mr. Hochberg, while you're going around meeting with various individuals and posing for photos, we get articles like this: Justice Department charges former Export-Import Bank official with bribery. And as I understand it, this individual were engaged in these activities on your watch, sir. And so perhaps maybe a little bit more time managing the store and a little less time posing for photo ops and lobbying for your reauthorization may lead to fewer indictments. I thank the chairman. I yield back the balance of the time I no longer have.
Thank the chairman. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the ranking member as well. And would like to explain that when I say Export-Import Bank, I'm really talking about 1,630 exporters in the state of Texas. I'm really talking about Texas being one of the top exporters in the country. It's more than a building that's located someplace with people in it. We're talking about, in my 9th Congressional District, 94 exporters. We're talking about 46 small businesses. We're talking about 14 minority-owned businesses. And we're talking about 5 women-owned businesses. So it's more than brick and mortar, more than people who happen to have engaged in some conduct that I don't approve of. Quite frankly, a lot of businesses engage in conduct that I don't approve of. Those who police us engage in conduct that I don't approve of. But I've never advocated eliminating one police department. Someone mentioned corporate welfare. This is a wonderful device, this iPad. It gives you access to the world immediately. The Huffington Post has reported in 2014, with reference to corporate welfare, that direct federal subsidies to corporations, and now they mention the Cato Institute. Cato Institute estimates that the federal subsidies to corporations cost taxpayers $100 billion every year. Let's really look into corporate welfare. Let's do something about corporate welfare. If this is the genesis, let's move on to revelations. I have some revelations. Federal tax breaks to corporations. The tax code gives corporations special tax breaks that have reduced what is supposed to be a 35% tax rate to an actual tax rate of 13%, saving these corporations an additional $200 billion annually. Let's talk about federal tax breaks to the wealthy. Federal tax breaks for wealthy hedge fund managers. Special tax breaks for hedge fund managers allow them to pay only 15%, a 15% tax rate, while people that they earn the money for usually pay a 35% tax rate. Want to talk about corporate welfare? What about subsidies for the fast food industry? Research by the University of Illinois and UC Berkeley documents that taxpayers pay about $243 billion each year in direct subsidies to the fast food industry because they pay wages that are so low that taxpayers must put up $243 billion to pay for public benefits the workers receive. My God, you know this is not a crime, but I think an argument can be made that it's sinful. So now we want to eliminate the XM Bank because of corporate welfare and criminality. My dear friends, if we didn't have the XM Bank, we would be trying to find a way to create it so that we can compete in the global marketplace. I agree with Mr. Lucas, and I thank you for your commentary, sir. I hope this doesn't hurt you back home, am I agreeing with you? But I want you to know I think that reform may be necessary, but that we should not throw out this baby with the bathwater. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing an interloper to have a moment. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the Chair recognizes Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, Delta CEO Richard Anderson testified before the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Sheets, that your predecessor informed him that Treasury was not going to negotiate with Europeans over XM subsidies. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Thank you. As you indicated, that meeting that you're referring to occurred before I was at the Treasury. What I can say is that we take the mandate that we've been given very seriously, and we have in fact negotiated with our European counterparts on aircraft. And we are pressing them and ready to go as quickly as they're prepared to go. And more broadly engaging on export credit financing with an eye toward further disciplining it.
How many meetings with other countries have you attended to discuss lowering export credit assistance?
So the meetings of the OECD and IWG negotiations are done by members of my team. But what I can tell you is that in international discussions with the Indians, with the Chinese, the Brazilians, in a number of meetings, more than I can count, we have discussed issues related to export credit and efforts to further widen the scope. This is when we engage with, particularly with our Chinese counterparts, this is one of the very, very first issues, perhaps after the exchange rate.
Well, let me go at it from another direction. How many countries receiving export subsidies has the Department of Treasury not engaged in its negotiations?
So I don't have a number for you. What I can say is that we get all the OECD members through that understanding, and my recollection is that we have 18 countries involved in the IWG. Now, some of those are also in the OECD, but I think that that expands the number of countries by another half dozen or so.
Well, if we could get a list of those that you've not engaged with, I'd appreciate that. In your testimony, you note that you'll work on possible ways to limit official financial support for large-bodied, wide-bodied aircraft, particularly for airlines with access to alternative sources of financing. Applying this principle more broadly, can you identify which aircraft makers, regardless of make of aircraft, would be unable to obtain financing without Ex-Im Bank involvement?
I don't have the analytics with me today to be able to answer that question, but we'd be happy to take a look and respond to you on that.
That's not a set answer that you could give of particular aircraft companies that.
I don't know the list.
Okay. Mr. Hochberg, reports have shown that the bank mischaracterized, and that's a strong word, but mischaracterized large businesses owned by billionaires and multinational conglomerates as small businesses, and that these errors have contributed to as much as $3 billion in authorizations that should have gone to small businesses, the small businesses that we talk about that supply for the larger corporations, including Boeing. How does the bank justify these errors?
Congressman, we take data accuracy as a central core mission of the bank. In fact, last fall we identified 4 key strategies for the bank, and data quality is one of them. In fact, just this day today, we had applied to OMB and it got emergency approval. We have updated our application form to make sure that we collect more accurate data from the actual exporter themselves. We relied on some outside databases, and now we have a little bit more of a belts and suspenders.
So the $3 billion of authorizations that should have gone to small businesses are a thing of the past now?
Well, no, they didn't. It's not a question should. It's a question of when the Reuters story came out, 97% of the transactions were accurate, and we looked at the other 200 to see how they were categorized. One of the difficulties, Congressman, is there are times you have a small business that grows large and therefore is no longer small, or a small business is sold. So this is a very dynamic database that changes, and we continually update it.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Give me any latitude for one more question.
Well, had you not called my attention to it, it would have made it much easier.
Everybody else has, but I'm trying to live by the rules. Mr. Hochberg, one final question. Acknowledging these reporting errors, the bank responded that it hired a new information officer, as you've said, and would conduct an overhaul of databases and review of paper documents. What is the status of these activities and results, and is it your testimony today that no large firms are classified as small in XM's current small business portfolio?
Well, we report our small business to Congress. We report our small business results. We make the utmost effort to make those completely accurate. But as I tried to say earlier, sometimes it's a very dynamic database. Companies get larger, and they are no longer small. They may be sold. They may be sold off from a large company. So we have to look at it at a moment in time. And what I have said is today, we enacted an improvement in our application system so we can get more accurate data, and it's one of the 4 things we focused on this year.
Thank you, and thank you for your letter.
Now now your time has expired, Mr. Wahlberg, and I appreciate you being maybe the only person in Washington who would rather ask for permission than forgiveness before they went ahead with something. But
remember, I'm a minister.
With that, the Chair recognizes Mr. Carney of Delaware for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all the panelists for coming in today and for addressing the questions that we've asked. And I would like to go back to the closing comments that the gentleman from Oklahoma made, Mr. Lucas, about the fact that the reauthorization XM is going to come before us sometime in the near future. And I suspect the progress going forward is going to depend in some measure on efforts to reform operations and the like, and I thought he kind of hit the nail on the head, and like to associate myself with him as someone willing to look at those things to find a path forward. And with that, I'd like to give the rest of my time to the gentleman from the State of Washington, Mr. Heck.
I thank the gentleman. I'd like to register for the record umbrage I've taken at a couple of tacks here today. The first of which is the imputing of the motives, integrity, and character of Mr. Hochberg. We can have our philosophical differences, our policy disagreements, but frankly, I think those suggestions do not at all match Mr. Hochberg's career of intermittent, outstanding public service. And I apologize on behalf of this institution. I think it's beneath our dignity. I also take umbrage at the suggestion that there is some kind of something untoward in the fact that the Export-Import Bank loans money to the foreign purchasers of American-made airplanes. When people ask me back home, they often do, why is it that there's quite a bit of activity in the aerospace industry? My shorthand response, and Mr. Hochberg, I'm going to ask you for years, is, well, who exactly is it in the commercial lending industry that you think would be willing to lend $200 to $300 million for Somalia to buy an airplane, as to why the Export-Import Bank is needed? But, Mr. Hochberg, why is it that there is such significant activity at the XM on behalf of America's aerospace industry? Let me say that again, America's aerospace industry.
Well, thank you, Congressman. You know, we in the United States are in a head-to-head competition with the Airbus on large aircraft. We are continually competing with them to make those sales. We also make guarantees. We don't make direct loans, so we are always engaged in the bank. It's a guaranteed loan. And the chairman asked me about Boeing when I was with Copa Airlines. As an example, they placed an order that will be delivered over anywhere between a 9 to 12-year period. And part and parcel of that order, giving the order to the United States and supporting 12,000 jobs here versus 12,000 jobs in Toulouse and Hamburg, was the fact that we would be a backstop. They don't need us for the entire order, but they do need us from time to time, and they predict over a 12-year period there will be financial stress. And in order to make that order and to give the confidence that they can take delivery, they needed us as a backstop. We could wind up doing zero, but they have to know that we're there as a reserve should the financial conditions warrant that we need to step in. And let me just add, we talk about Boeing. There's a lot of discussion of big companies. I visited one of Boeing's suppliers in Missouri, LMI. Company started as Leonard's Metal Industries, is now called LMI. Visited a company in Eaton Aerospace in Jackson, Mississippi. Boeing is a conglomeration, just like the Ford Motor Company is an assembly plant. The Boeing Company is an assembly plant. It is assembling components from more than 15,000 businesses, about 6,000 of which are small businesses. So we're not talking about a large company. We're talking about a very deep supply chain that would be impacted if there's any untoward action here.
So much has been made over the last few years about the importance to America's future of revitalizing its manufacturing base. I realize this is calling for a subjective evaluation, but how important to America's manufacturing base do you think the thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers working across all platforms of technology are to America's manufacturing base and our future?
If we want to compete, if the United States wants to compete in capital goods, if we want to compete with the likes of China, Japan, Korea, Germany, and others on capital goods, we need to have a backstop to provide the kind of long-term 12-year money that is required. And that goes above and beyond, as you mentioned, all the engineers, all the designers, all the patents, and everything else that's developed that creates those products we can sell in the global marketplace.
I yield back.
Gentleman from Delaware yields back. With that, the Chair recognizes Mr. Gowdy of South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually supported, Mr. Chairman, the 2012 reauthorization, and there will be another day, in my judgment, to debate the merits and demerits of the bank and the reauthorization. And there will be reasonable minds on both sides of that, and there will be colleagues that I respect on both sides of that. What, Mr. Chairman, is not open for debate is whether or not the bank and the Department of Treasury have a responsibility to cooperate with oversight. This committee has a responsibility to provide oversight, and you have a corresponding obligation to assist with that. So, Mr. Sheets, can you tell me with specificity the name of the person negotiating the end of the need for Ex-Im banks?
So I would say, consistent with the mandate, that there are a number of people.
Okay, well then give me all the names.
I would say, consistent with the mandate, the responsibility rests with the Secretary, with me.
Okay, well, are you going to make yourself available for a transcribed interview with Financial Services so they can ask you about the status of those negotiations to end the need for the banks?
We have, in my remarks today, outlined in some detail the things that we're doing. And we are vigorously engaged.
That actually, Mr. Sheets, was not my question. My question is, are you willing to make yourself available for a transcribed interview so my colleagues on Financial Services can ask you with specificity what steps you're taking as the 2012 reauthorization required to end the need for such banks?
We as a regular and routine matter, make ourselves available to Congress.
And you have updated Chairman Hensarling on all the progress that's being made with specificity?
Consistent with the mandate.
You don't have to say consistent with the mandate. You and I both know what we're talking about.
No. Consistent with the mandate, we're required to submit an annual report. And
That's not my question, Mr. Sheets. My question is very particular. Are you willing to submit to a transcribed interview with financial services so they can ask you about all the progress you've been making about ending the need for ex-im banks? You can start with a yes and a no, and then you can explain it.
And as I said, as a routine matter,
No, you haven't said. That's my point, Mr. Sheets, is you haven't said, and it took forever for you to respond to a request from Chairman Hensley. I'm going to tell you this, Mr. Sheets. Right now, the single best argument against reauthorization is you. Chairman Hochberg, you referred to transcribed interviews as inherently adversarial. Tell me why you said that.
We have made ourselves available, Congressman, for briefings repeatedly on the Hill. And
Mr. Chairman, I've got limited time, and I'm going to need you to kind of go straight to the answer. You described transcribed interviews as inherently adversarial. Why did you say that? What is inherently adversarial about taking testimony under oath, which I hasten to add is exactly what we're doing today?
And I think this is an excellent forum for that, sir.
Well, do you think Congress should be able to provide a little input into what they think an excellent forum is? Or are you the sole arbiter of that?
No, without question, sir. I'm saying we've made ourselves available for briefings, and we make ourselves available for hearings.
Will you make yourself and your employees, under the purview of oversight, available for a transcribed interview, just like everyone else has to submit to when they're requested by Congress?
We would prefer to have a briefing and understand what the transcribed interview would be about before we commit to that.
Well, Mr.
Hard to know what the subject is, sir.
I'm just going to tell you this. For those of us that live in states that benefit from the bank, and for those of us who have supported the reauthorization and would like to support future reauthorizations, I would encourage you to revisit your answer to that question. When the chairman of financial services asked to take transcribed interviews, which is nothing more than an interview under oath behind closed doors, I fail to see how that's appreciably different from what you and I are doing right now. You're under oath right now.
Correct, sir.
It's being transcribed. That's what the lady beside you is doing. So what's the difference?
It's in public, sir.
So you prefer for these employees to be brought in public?
I would prefer it to be in a hearing setting where we have full disclosure. Both sides of the aisle can hear, and both sides of the aisle can ask questions.
Have you ever been to a transcribed interview? Because both sides are represented there too, Mr. Chairman.
No, I have not.
Okay, well then when you are subject to a transcribed interview, which may be soon, you will see that both sides get to participate in that. Now I want to ask you one follow-up question because I'm out of time.
It's at the chair's discretion. However, as has been pointed out, the chair will now make sure that everybody adheres to the 5-minute rule, which includes both sides, apparently. So with that, sorry, Mr. Gowdy, your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, Mr. Clay of Missouri will have his 5 minutes exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will try to observe the 5 minutes. I want to take a moment to thank Chairman Hochberg for his leadership and the Ex-Im Bank's role in supporting so many small businesses seeking to compete successfully in the global market. You know, Ex-Im directly supports 17 small and medium-sized businesses in the 1st Congressional District of Missouri by providing millions of dollars in credit support to businesses that sustain many of the families and communities in my district. Despite the vital role that the bank plays in supporting small businesses, the bank's reauthorization has been held hostage to partisan extremism. I want to reiterate my support for H.R. 1031, the Promoting U.S. Jobs Through Exports Act of 2015, a comprehensive proposal that expands the bank's support for small businesses, enhances its transparency, and reduces the bank's risk to taxpayers. With nearly 250 members of this body lending their support to a renewal of the bank, I remain hopeful that partisan extremism will eventually yield to the overwhelming support for the bank's reauthorization. And just one question for Mr. Hochberg. If Congress fails to reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank, which business sectors would begin to feel the pain first, Mr. Chairman?
I believe first and foremost will be our small businesses in our country. 90% of our customers are small businesses, and they frequently, well, in all cases when they come to us, don't have another option. A number of banks have already said they've begun to curtail their extension of credit to small businesses due to the potential not being reauthorized in July. Another company I would say is there are also a lot of companies in the supply chain. In the state of Missouri itself, I visited a company called LMI in St. Charles. They are a supplier to Gulfstream, Cessna, many companies. They would find an immediate impact because sales would begin to shift towards airplanes made in Canada, airplanes made in Brazil, Europe, Russia, China, and places like that.
So Congress's inaction is having a negative impact on our economy and will do serious damage if we continue down this path.
We have already gotten some reports from different sectors about that.
Thank you for your response. And, Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to the ranking member from California, Ms. Waters.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. First, let me just commend our witnesses here today on the way that you have conducted yourself despite the attacks that have been thrown at you. You've done a wonderful job. And let me also say, Mr. Hochberg, Mr. Sheets, you have the right to decline on transcribed interviews, and we're not happy with the way that they handle transcribed interviews. They've refused to give us memorandums of understanding. So having said that, let me go to something that I think we need to expand on. Mr. Hochberg, how much has China's export credit agencies financed in the past 2 years versus the U.S. Export-Import Bank?
Well, in the last 2 years, Sinosure alone has done close to $670 billion. The China Ex-Im Bank is not as transparent. It's about $80 or $90 million. And on top of that, you have 2 other Chinese banks that do that same kind of work. In that same period, last year and the year before, we would have done $47 billion.
I'm sorry, would you give us those numbers again?
Sure. China Sinosure, which is their short-term credit insurance, the kind of things we do for our small businesses, has done $670 billion in the last 2 years alone. There's also the China Ex-Im Bank that does, generally speaking, in the 80 to 90 million a year. That's directly from the chairman of that bank. Plus, there are 2 other, there's the China Development Bank and the China Agricultural Bank.
Thank you. And can you talk about the nature and mission of other countries' export credit agencies that allows them to support their industry's exports far beyond what
With
the
that, the
Ex-Im Bank
gentleman's time
does?
has expired per the gentlelady's request. And with that, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we all get to do the lightning round because we all now have to talk a lot faster. Ms. McCarthy, you might be the arbiter of a little bit of fairness here. Okay, total U.S. exports last year, 164, $1,640 billion. Yet you were, somewhere in here I was hearing that the book of business from import-export actually went down a little bit last year.
It's correct. There was a decline in the book of business. The outstanding exposure went from $113 billion to $112 billion.
Okay, so is that so? If you do the simple math, import-export represents less than 1% of U.S. export, at least from a total book of business. Simple math.
I'm not an economist, but
that's called
the math sounds
division.
correct.
That's, as you as a CPA, I'm sure you do that in the back of your head. How did import-export banks' book of business go down, yet our exports went up where, heaven, are these organizations finding surety, enhancement credit? So what's happening out there in the marketplace that's also providing some of this type of liquidity? What are your
Well, let me
what's your
give a very high-level answer because this isn't my area of expertise, but my understanding is that the Ex-Im Bank loan portfolio increased after the financial crisis because liquidity was less available in the private markets.
My focus is the 14-year,
there's
just
more.
because I have a nice block year where I can run the numbers.
Well, let me I would defer to Chairman Hochberg on the larger, bank operational issues.
Okay, Mr. Thome, you had a grin on that. Walk me through what you understand as where are these other organizations getting import-export credit?
I don't recall having a grin, sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Listening intently.
Yeah, okay. So right now you're telling me, and we'll go to Mr. Hochberg, share with me, what's happening out there in the alternative or private marketplace on the loan enhancement side that it was able to grow last year in 2014?
The private sector has done a spectacular job in the last 2 years, and there's far less need for us today than there was 2 years ago. As you commented, Congressman, our portfolio has, and our loan volume has gone down, and that's a good thing. We step in when the private sector isn't available or cannot do so.
Okay, so if I came to you right now and said, one of my ultimate goals here is, because I believe in the pricing of risk is best in the crowd, in the marketplace, how do I continue to grow that private guarantee? Because so far the conversation around here has been a bit absurd. If you're 1% of the exports and part of your book of business went away, would there be alternatives? The world comes to an end. I mean, the math doesn't add up. So what would you do to continue to grow the real world instead of the taxpayer-insured world?
Actually, I think we do that every day. What we're trying to do is encourage more banks to do so. What happens is frequently banks and insurance companies, they will work with us, and then over time, either they say, we can do this on our own now. We take the training wheels off, and we can now do this. That's our goal.
Do you believe that would expand more the syndication of risk silos and those mechanics if you weren't the easy default? I mean, it's sort of an...
Well, I only will tell you what our customers tell us. When I went to, I was in, I'm just looking, I was recently in Alabama, a company called Zonte that makes printing.
I'm less after anecdotes, I'm more just after sort of the
Well,
basic,
they come
just
to
because
me,
of the time we
say,
have.
I need to come to you because I don't have an alternative. That's why people come to us.
In my basic economics would say they don't have an alternative because if you're in the market, why should the private, compete with you? Also, in digging through some of the mechanics, do you believe you define default and failure to meet reps and warrants? Don't look through your tabs. Reps and warrants the same as Chase Bank or any other SIFI out there that because you have a wonderful default rate, impairment rate. Do you define impairment the same as the rest of the major money center banking industry?
We define faults as charge-offs as where we
Okay,
pay
so
claims.
it's full charge-off. So it's not even a violation. But if I'm Chase, I have to define an impairment even when there's a failure in my reps and warrants.
We put in our
But what you're telling me right now is that's not ceteris paribus, I think was the old word we had in college, of you're not doing equal to equal in definition of what impairment is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
With that, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wisconsin for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I have unanimous consent to enter two documents for the record. One, I reference Crews Under Fire from Texas Businessmen. And secondly, a statement of support for the Ex-Im Bank from the National Association of Manufacturers.
Without objection, so ordered. With that, seeing no other witnesses at this time on the Democrat side of the aisle, we'll continue on the Republican side of the aisle with Mr. Meadows of North Carolina, who is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, each of you for being here. I really don't have any other questions that would help further this debate, but I will say, Mr. Chairman Hochberg, it is troubling when you answer the way that you do, when you've got somebody like myself who's trying to make up a decision on reauthorization, and the lack of transparency, the lack of willingness to come before oversight is troubling to me, and quite frankly, more troubling to the American people on Main Street who don't understand why you would not submit to transcribed interviews under oath, and why you would want to do it in a public forum. And so I would just ask you to reconsider your position, as Mr. Gowdy had covered earlier. And with that, I have no questions, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Actually, I yield to Mr. Gowdy for follow-up.
And I thank my friend from North Carolina. So, Mr. Chairman, you have heard from an undecided member of Congress who is less than overwhelmed with your answers with respect to oversight. And you have heard from a member of Congress who very much wants to support reauthorization. So I think you said you're not an attorney. I once was. Ms. Waters did give you some legal advice that you have the right to decline a transcribed interview. I would also remind you that members of Congress have a right to factor that in as they determine whether or not to reauthorize this bank. And before I yield to my friend from South Carolina, I want to ask you about something else. In a letter that you wrote to Chairman Hensarling, you said that you made redactions to protect the candid exchanges of views by the bank's board members. And I'm curious what legal privilege entitles you to make that redaction.
We submitted our board minutes, board transcribes to the committee. We try and leave out deliberative matters and business confidential information. So
I get that, but you also said you were going to protect candid exchanges of views by the bank's board members. If you were providing oversight, wouldn't you want candid exchanges as opposed to, say, stale boilerplate discussions? If your responsibility is to provide oversight, wouldn't you want candid exchanges?
Well, we have a candid exchange at our board meetings, but at the end of the day, what's most critical is how board members vote, whether they vote for or against a transaction.
And I would tell you that the results in life matter, but the process may matter even more. And I would encourage you to revisit that position with Chairman Hensarling as well. And with that, I would yield to my friend from South Carolina.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Sheets, very briefly.
Parliamentary inquiry.
If they can stop the clock.
Whose time is it, sir?
I'll reclaim my time.
It is the gentleman from North Carolina.
In reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets. One of the reasons that we focus so closely on these supposed discussions with the folks overseas about getting out of the aircraft financing business is the data that was been provided to us by Mrs. Giannopoulos. I read your reports. I've got your reports. I read your testimony, which is pretty much a cut and paste of your last report, and yet we have data, real data, that says, if we can get up on the screen, that the bank's exposure to the aircraft market has gone up, not down. It's the dark blue at the bottom. It's not going down. You're measuring it in such a way where I think you can fill out a piece of paper that says you're doing what you're supposed to do, but the real data indicates that the exact opposite is happening. That's what's causing us the difficulties, sir. Other things cause us difficulties about this. Mr. Liu, Secretary Liu, was in front of the Financial Services Committee just a couple weeks ago. I had a chance to ask him the same questions, very similar questions Mr. Gowdy asked you. I asked him, I said, can you tell us who's in charge of these negotiations? And he said he's going to have to get back to me on that. You identified him just a little while ago in response to Mr. Gowdy's question as somebody who was involved. Do you think he would be able to recall if he was involved in those discussions?
Thank you. I have a hard time hitting the button. The mandate, as I understand it—
That's not the— I'm not asking for the mandate. I'm saying you said that he was involved. Has Secretary Liu been directly involved in the discussions that are mandated by the statute?
Yes.
Okay. We've asked him to provide us with information. He's, my guess is, I'm told by staff, that you're the one responsible for pulling those together. Are you, sir?
I have not seen a request.
You've not talked to Mr. Liu about this since March 17th when he appeared before the Financial Services Committee?
I have not seen a request, but as soon as we see it, we will ready.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I got 8 seconds. The last time this committee asked for information from Treasury about this, it took 9 months to get the response. When did we get it? Yesterday. Do you understand, maybe, sir, why we have this type of adversarial relationship?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman's time from North Carolina has expired. Does the gentlelady from Wisconsin have an inquiry?
No, I just want to make sure that
Well,
the ranking member that he not be allowed to go on.
ranking
we
member
didn't,
went
we did
about a
not,
minute
just
and a
just
half
moment.
over.
The ranking member was not cut off. It was not the gentleman.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman from Missouri was the one whose time had expired. Yes, gentleman from South Carolina, who withdraws. Okay. Again, still seeing no members on the Democrat side that are eligible to be recognized in this first round. We will move on to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hartsburg, what information does the bank publicly post about either the bank's transactions, suppliers, buyers, or other type information?
Could you, I'm not exactly sure I understand the nature of the question.
Well, data.gov, for instance, do you post this type of information for the public regarding transactions and buyers and all this type of thing?
Right. We post our data on data.gov for all transactions.
Okay. Why did the bank remove so much of the data set from the federal government's public site in the fall of 2014?
We removed some of that data because we had some complaints from customers that they felt business confidential information, names of their customers, pricing, and so forth was included. So in an effort not to in any way hurt any U.S. exporters, we took the data down, reviewed it, and then put it back up within a few weeks.
Well, when you put it back up, it came right after a watchdog group, xmuncensored.com, posted some information, and when you reposted, there was a lot of information that was missing. Why was that missing?
We removed information at the request of actual exporters because the last thing we want to do is jeopardize their business. So we took out information that they felt was business confidential, like who their customers are, what their pricing is, but left the rest of the information.
Well, without that information being posted, quite frankly, how do we know whether or not applicants are being treated fairly or not?
Well, first of all, if applicants aren't treated fairly, they complain. So we would get complaints if they're not. We took the data down in response to complaints that they felt their business was being jeopardized, and we took a look at it and we said, we don't really need to post the names and addresses of their exact customers. Our customers, we all keep our customer list somewhat confidential. When I was in business, we don't share customer lists with competitors, and it's the same case in this particular case, and that's why the data was removed and then put promptly back up.
Why did the bank decide to remove information regarding things like primary supplier of the XM authorizations? Why was it necessary to remove that type of information?
Again, we responded in response to customers, exporters, small businesses that were concerned about trade secrets and confidential information being revealed. So in order to balance transparency and also protect businesses, we tried to strike that balance.
Can you provide this committee with the requests of these companies further information for us?
As long as I understand precisely what you're asking for, we can provide it.
Yeah, as the information that was removed, precisely what was removed.
What fields? I'd be happy to do that. I review that personally myself to say, why did we remove these fields? Do we need to? And we put many of them back up.
All right. Over half of the 27,000 plus authorizations that were in the new data set had NA listed as their primary lender. I find that a bit odd. How do you explain not having any information regarding the primary lender for over half of the authorizations?
I'd have to take a look at that data.
You have no idea why NA was placed on 27,000 plus in place of a primary lender?
I can make conjecture. I don't want to do that, sir. I'd rather get you the exact facts.
Well, if the bank has this information, why is it no longer available to the public?
I'd have to look at the data, sir, and I'll be happy to get it to you. I'm not fully familiar.
So you don't have a reason why it would not be available. You may not know why it was left out, but
this should be if we have the data, we'd make it available.
All right. The new data set also lists NA as a primary exporter for nearly 1,200 transactions. Do you have any idea why that would be the case?
I'd have to look at, I'll give you a full report. I don't have it at my fingertips. What is the precise?
Doesn't it seem like this would be something that would be at your fingertips?
Sir, I try and keep as much as I can at my fingertips and in my head, but we all have our limits.
Why does the bank have various and insurance listed as the country, the primary source of repayment, and so forth for 60% of these 27,000 plus authorizations? So it's totally in the wrong place, the wrong things. It's up here. We can get this information for you so you can look at it. I know it's small, but you have various insurance listed as the country, the primary source of repayment, and so forth.
We offer what are called multi-buyer insurance policies. We've got small businesses that sell to dozens of companies, so frequently that we do not always list every single customer they're selling to because it's a blanket policy that covers many credits.
Sorry, the gentleman's time has expired.
Sorry. Thank you, sir.
And again, seeing no members on the Democrat side who are eligible for this first round, we go to Mr. Stutzman of Indiana for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the panel for being here this morning. I want to ask a question here. Just first of all, I'll say this to you all. You know, I've been trying to keep an open mind about this, and I understand the role that folks try to argue for the reauthorization of XM. I did vote against the last reauthorization, and I am inclined to do so again at this point, considering the role that the XM Bank has played, and also the lack of transparency and the issues that we discussed today. Mr. Hochberg, could you answer the question that the gentleman from Arizona was talking about earlier? What are what's the number of U.S. exports in 2014?
Excuse me. The number of exporters that
in
we worked with?
Dollar amount in exports for 2014 from the U.S.
About $2.35 trillion.
About $2.35 trillion?
Correct.
And the business that you do in that is about $112 billion.
No, we did, no, actually, we financed $27.5 billion worth of exports last year.
$27.5 billion?
Correct.
Out of $2.35 trillion?
That's correct.
Okay. So what it was said earlier by the gentleman from Pennsylvania that XM Bank is hugely successful. Would you agree with that?
We act as a backstop. I would say we are successful.
Okay, so what I'm curious, though, is out of $2.35 trillion, $27.5 billion, hugely successful. The question I'm asking myself is, why can't the private sector handle that little amount? I mean, that's not that much in the grand scheme of things. I want to go to, you know, according to your competitiveness report, both France and Germany provided more new, medium, and long-term export credit than the United States did in 2007. 5 years later, we were providing more export credit than both countries combined. China provides more than what we do, and in addition, based on Treasury's own reports, it does not look like congressionally mandated negotiations to end export credit subsidies are being taken seriously by the department. I worry that what might happen to Indiana's exporters as these trends continue, especially with China's new role, it could disrespect trade rules. Let me ask you this. Suppose the world supply of exports multiplies 3 or 4 times over the next few years. Should export-import grow at that same rate?
Congressman, mostly what I have learned in my 6 years on the job is that we really stand to fill in a gap. So when we've got a small business, or in your own state, Cummins Engine, they don't use us most of the time, but they need us in a few select circumstances.
Should we just continue to grow at a certain pace? I mean,
we only respond as filling in a gap. If a company like Cummins or a small business I mentioned earlier, a company called Zante, needs us, we step in. When they don't need us, we step away.
Okay, all right. So again, so $27.5 billion out of $2.35 trillion can't be handled by the private sector, is what you're saying. I want to ask you another question. You know, I think most of us would agree that in a perfect world that we wouldn't have export credit agencies. Would you agree with that?
We just don't live in that perfect world.
Okay, so considering today's developing economies, we have countries all around the world that are growing. Have any of them approached you, or I would ask Mr. Sheets at the Treasury, have any of them approached you about how to develop an export-import model in those developing countries?
We've, from time to time, have countries come visit us and spend maybe a few days or a week with our staff to learn what they can do to support their exports in their countries.
Mr. Sheets.
And I haven't been involved in any of those conversations and don't know of any regarding me or my staff at the time.
But would anybody on staff, if someone came to you all, would you help them develop a model so they understand how an export-import model would work?
I think that absolutely, that thinking through best practices and how to frame an export-import bank would be something that we could carry on a conversation with international counterparts on quite productively.
But wouldn't that then directly contradict the congressional mandate to eliminate global export subsidies?
So my focus is on the U.S. side of that equation, but
if we're talking to any foreign entities and they're wondering how does an export-import model work, wouldn't that violate the mandate?
And the gentleman's time has expired, but I'll allow the answer if that's all right.
So my answer to your question is it wouldn't, in that the issue is gaps in market financing, and these countries that don't have Ex-Im banks don't have well-developed financial sectors.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just seems like we're contradicting ourselves on trying to eliminate the competition.
Okay, and with that, we've reached the end of our first round, and we'd like to entertain a brief second round, if that is okay with the panel as well. And the chairman had been kind enough to recognize me to speak first on that first round, and it's my pleasure to recognize the chairman of this committee, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. McCarthy, you said 31 investigations, open investigations related to fraud. Can you tell me, or more importantly, can you assure the Congress, can you assure this committee and the Congress that none of those 31 are going to turn out like Mr. Gutierrez?
So the answer that I gave to this question last summer is that we have, including the Mr. Gutierrez investigation, we have some allegations of serious misconduct and ineffective management. Outside of those small number of investigations, we have not developed evidence that there's widespread employee involvement.
So you said earlier most of these fraud investigations involve a company seeking financing, doing something fraudulent to get the finance. So it comes from outside. But that's exactly how Mr. Gutierrez's thing played out as well. Wasn't Impex the company, basically a shill company trying to get financing? Mr. Gutierrez complied with that and worked with that. And so that fraud case that resulted in the indictment of Mr. Gutierrez earlier this week started with a company doing exactly what you allege most of these 31 open fraud investigations are about.
So without getting into the details...
No, I'm asking, is that accurate?
Without getting into the details of that specific case,
I'll give you the details.
Well,
69-page complaint filed in the U.S. District Court, Southern District of Florida, laid out how Impex Associates was little more than an artifice to defraud the bank. So it started off with a outside organization entity trying to defraud the bank, but there was someone on the inside actually taking bribes and committing fraud and now been indicted.
And in those cases where we see those types of outside frauds, we are taking a hard look at whether there's employee complicity or participation in the scheme.
Which takes me back to my question. You got 31 of these open right now.
Right.
We want to know, before this Congress is asked to reauthorize something, with all the problems that's been cited here in today's hearing, can you assure us that none of those other cases are like Mr. Gutierrez?
So what I can assure you is that at this time, those other cases that we're investigating do not have evidence that we've developed of Ex-Im Bank employee internal complicity or participation.
Have you referred any of those other cases, any of the 31, have you referred those to the Justice Department?
We work routinely with the Justice Department on most of our cases.
Do you know if the Justice Department is going to, are we going to have an indictment tomorrow? We're going to have an indictment before the next Ex-Im hearing that Mr. Henschling has or Mr. Chaffetz has in when's the next indictment coming?
There's a possibility that there will be future indictments in this particular case. There's a possibility there will be future indictments in other
So wait a minute.
cases.
So I want to know, that's a big statement. You think there's a possibility of future indictments in the Gutierrez case or in some of the other 31 cases?
Both.
Both? Well, that's important information for this committee and this Congress to understand. You made it sound earlier like, oh, no, these are people just filed some wrong paperwork, something that's coming on the outside. But now you're saying there's possibility of future indictments relative to the Gutierrez case and the other 31 open fraud investigations. Is that right?
What I'm saying is that there's possibilities of future indictments in the Gutierrez case, and in the other 31 cases, there's possibility of indictments in those cases as well. In those other cases,
what other cases? Now you're going beyond 31. What other cases?
Within those 31 cases, I would not at this time expect indictments of other ex-im
So
employees.
now you're getting to the point I want. How do you define those 31 cases? So when you testified here last summer, Wall Street Journal just reported about Mr. Gutierrez and 3 other people. You and Mr. Hochberg wouldn't tell me who the 3 other people were. You wouldn't even confirm Mr. Gutierrez in that hearing. Were those 4 individuals, is that one case of fraud, or are those 4 separate cases of fraud? How do you define it?
Those are 3 separate cases.
3 cases,
So
okay.
one of them involves Mr. Gutierrez and another former ex-im employee. The other 2 cases involve 1 employee each. Those are separate cases, and those cases have been closed out, and I've reported
So
back
how
on
many
those.
individuals are involved in the 31? It could be a lot more than 31 based on what you just told me. Is that accurate?
Well, many of our cases and indictments, we have indictments of multiple individuals in these schemes.
Okay. Okay. That's, Mr. Chairman, I think that's huge. That the possibility we got future indictments coming, and we got a decision to make here in a couple months. That is huge news, and something I think this committee needed to know, and I'm glad that Mr. McCarthy was able to give us that information. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the chair recognizes Vice Chair Moore of Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for your patience with the second round. There's been a lot of discussion about the 1992 bailout of the Ex-Im Bank. And I guess maybe Ms. Giannopoulos is the person that I need to ask about the restructuring of the Ex-Im Bank since 1992 to the fee-for-service model. And, you know, are they in a position for us to have to bail them out again?
Well, it's difficult to say if we're going to have to bail out the bank again. Of course, some of our recommendations that over the past few years since the 2012 reauthorization have focused on the way that the bank looks at its portfolio risk management, and the bank has been responsive to almost all of the recommendations we've made since that time to look at how they're calculating that loss.
Thank you so very much. There's been a lot of discussion about the stress test that the bank has undergone. I guess, Mr. Hochberg, I want you to tell us how you have performed under these stress tests.
Well, Congresswoman, I think the most perfect stress test we've had is the recession that we've just gone through. And if I take a look at, I'm sorry, it was in my written testimony, but our defaults, as reported to Congress, in 2006 were a high of 1.6%. We've gone through the worst recession, the most stressful time in not only our economy, but the global economy. And as you can see in the written testimony, our defaults have declined each and every year since. So that, in my opinion, is still the most perfect stress test. On top of that, we do stress tests in our CFO's department on a routine basis to look at different stresses in our portfolio. But let's not forget that the recession created a very perfect example of that.
Well, I appreciate hearing that, particularly since under Title I of Dodd-Frank, the globally systemic risky banks that we bailed out during 2008 have not yet submitted their living wills as mandated under Title I in 2010. So I would say that there's a lot more risk from Wall Street and from the banking community that there is with the Ex-Im Bank. Let me ask this question. There's been a lot of discussion of Delta. So there have been lawsuits. I think Delta has really gone to court to suggest that the Ex-Im Bank has put them in a very non-competitive situation. I guess I would like for the committee to hear what the results of those lawsuits have been, Mr. Hochberg.
Thank you, Vice Chair Moore. Delta has sued the bank on 4 occasions. The courts have ruled in favor of the Export-Import Bank in all 4 occasions. and has not found anything in their particular case. The cases basically say that when we finance a foreign carrier, could that potentially have damage to a U.S. company? We review, as I've mentioned, every single transaction, not just in the aircraft, but the entire bank. Any transaction over $10 million we look at for any potential harm. The last thing we want to do at the Export-Import Bank is harm the U.S. economy and hurt the U.S. economy. So we look at, it's called economic impact. We look at the positive benefits and make an estimation with outside consultants about any potential harm, and we balance those two against each other. And we have, so Delta has claimed that. We review every aircraft transaction and found no evidence of it.
I guess my last minute, I turn to Mr. Sheets, because we have heard an awful lot of talk about this indictment of Mr. Gutierrez and potential indictments coming down from the Ex-Im Bank. I just am so concerned about the lack of indictments for what happened in 2008, and I'm wondering if what we see in the Ex-Im Bank indictments has nearly the globally systemic impact that we saw in 2008, where we've seen very few indictments come down.
The impact of the bank failures during 2008 and 2009 globally was of astronomical proportions, not only here in the United States, but the global implications of that were literally beyond what I can calculate in terms of lost economic output and jobs and human and psychic pain. I don't think that these indictments are of a similar magnitude.
Well, the gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Not a problem at all, my friend. So with that, not seeing, I'm sorry, at this point, the Chair would like to recognize Mr. Pittenger of North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hochberg, in just a brief elevator speech, would you kindly define for me your mission?
Our mission is to support U.S. jobs and provide financing through the form of guarantees, insurance, or loans when the private sector is unwilling or unable to do so.
And you see that your goal, your objective, a wide range of business interests to try to support their objectives.
It's to support U.S. job growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and your loan portfolio is how much?
Approximately $112 billion.
$112 billion. What was that portfolio in 2013?
I have that right here. In fact, it was in 2013. It was slightly higher. It was just under $114 billion.
114 million.
Billion.
Billion. Mr. Hochberg, you stated a few minutes ago that 90% of your loans were made to small business. Correct.
Correct.
I'm reading here in the 2013, according to the Ex-Im Bank's own data, more than 60% of the Ex-Im Bank's financing benefited just 10 large corporations.
Well, I think what we have to remember, Congressman, is that those 10 corporations that you refer to all have very deep supply chains. I was just in Georgia, a company called Tomco, small business that makes CO2.
But the people who borrowed the money
they
were
a supplier to GE. The reason GE
I reclaim my time. The people who borrowed the money, though, were those large corporations. Is that right?
And therefore pay the small business.
But the loans, let's be clear on what the words that were said. You said 90% of your loans were made to small business.
No, 90% of the loans support small business exports.
Well,
we don't
now
make,
you're
and
words, okay.
even though those 10 large companies referred to, we're talking about their overseas customers, not the company themselves.
I think we had a word change there, and that's fine. Mr. Hochberg, do you believe that you have an agenda in your role? Do you have a policy preference? Do you believe that your goal is to support all businesses and create jobs? Or do you have a selective interest in what you do?
We're looking to support U.S. job growth that need us. We have a few mandates from Congress that we obviously guide our efforts as well.
Yes, and one of your mandates, of course, is to support exports of green energy technology. Is that right?
That is one of the 3 mandates we have.
That's right. And on the other hand, you've adopted policies, though, that would permits almost no assistance to coal projects. Is that correct?
No, that I would not say that's correct, sir.
Well, let me quote you. Upon an announcement of these guidelines, you were quoted as saying, without guidelines or limits, ever-increasing numbers of new coal plants worldwide will just continue to emit more carbon pollution into the air we breathe. I strongly support the administration's efforts to build an international consensus such that other nations follow our lead in restricting financing of new coal-fired power plants. That sounds pretty clear interest that you have in perpetuating your own agenda.
Well, Congress has put in our charter since 1992 a requirement that we look at the environmental impact of any export we supply. We have to look at the credit worthiness and the environmental impact. That goes back 23 years.
Well, okay, but this contrasts what you just said a minute ago, that you didn't have your own objectives. Let me ask you as well, we looked at the credit worthiness. You have adopted policies, excuse me for my voice, having a little problem with that. In September of last year, the GAO reviewed the bank's underwriting procedures and found that the bank wasn't requiring simple things like using credit reports. We've talked a little bit about this, but I really want to delve into it a little more. Verifying that applicants did not have any delinquent federal debt, or even to merely acquire that all documentation and analysis be in the loan file before approval. From the GAO report, if you'd like to give us an example, in your own manual, did not include instructions for loan officers to use credit reports and for the inclusion of all required documents and analysis in the loan file prior to approval. While XM's review process called for transaction participants' information to be checked against various databases, it did not include the recommended databases that identified delinquent federal debt of the transaction to participants. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, Congressman, one, I would say 2 things. We're continually trying to improve our methods and do a better job of underwriting. I was in business for 20 years. That's what every business person does, and we're trying to improve in this case as well. One of the things we're looking at that we're having some discussion of, how we look at other, I believe you're referring to other outstanding debts that a company may have before they can apply for a loan or guarantee from us.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the Chair recognizes the ranking member on House Financial Services Committee, Representative Waters of California.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sheets, Undersecretary Nathan Sheets, I'm looking at an ad that was placed in Politico. And this ad basically raises the question, why all the applause? And they have the pictures of Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, Vladimir Putin, the President of the Russian Federation, and Francois Hollande, President of France. And then it answers the question. They're applauding those in Washington seeking to dismantle the U.S. Ex-Im Bank. And then it asks why. Because shutting down the U.S. Ex-Im Bank is good for business and creates thousands of jobs in China, in Russia, and in France. And then the ad goes on to say, don't let American jobs go overseas, keep the playing field level for American businesses, reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank. Now, until recently, most large official providers of export credits were party to the OECD arrangement, which, as you know, sets limits on the rates and terms that government-backed export credit agencies can provide to their exporters. However, according to Ex-Im Bank's latest competitiveness report, as of 2013, 2/3 of all official export credit support went beyond OECD guidelines. Much of this unregulated financing is offered by China, Brazil, India, and Russia on far more generous terms than can be offered by Ex-Im Bank and other members of the multilateral OECD arrangement. Given this trend, it seems to me that this is exactly the wrong time to be pushing to scale back or shut down the bank altogether. with many countries doubling down on their efforts to spur growth by expanding exports with the support of export credit financing. What would it take for these countries to entertain U.S. efforts to push for a global reduction in export credit support? Moreover, how much leverage does the U.S. Actually have in pushing for a multilateral reduction in export credit financing when the world is well aware that efforts are already underway in Congress to unilaterally shut down the Ex-Im Bank? Well, we've been talking a lot about this today, and this ad, even though it's by one of the proponents, you know, for reauthorization, it really does describe what we've been talking about. How do these countries get away with ignoring the arrangement, and how big are their efforts to do that?
Thank you. As you point out, the moves toward unilateral curtailment of export credits would put us in a much weaker position in our negotiations vis-a-vis these important emerging market economies that you describe. I think the incentive that they have, and it is what's driving this international working group and our efforts to extend the protocols and the international agreements to include the major emerging market economies, is a recognition that they benefit from global integration, and that the only way they can integrate sustainably into the global environment is by playing by the rules of the game. And this international working group is a vigorous effort by the Treasury and others to bring them inside the periphery. It's also, as I've said, a key objective in our multilateral engagement and our bilateral engagement is to better articulate these best practices and expand the periphery of export guidelines to the extent that we can.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just say this. I have not been one that have been known to, you know, go around waving the flag all the time. But I feel like we're being pushed around. I feel like the greatest country in the world is being not only pushed around, but taken advantage of. And while we sit here talking about closing down our Export-Import Bank, we have people laughing at us and clapping and applauding, hoping that we do it. And I don't like it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. With that, the Chair recognizes the Chair of Oversight and Government Reform, Mr. Chaffetz of Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Hochberg. You indicated that you were in Panama at the with the President of the United States. This was a $6+ billion transaction. What is the XM participation in that?
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. The order is at $6.6 billion at list prices. That's not what the airline will pay. We may do zero financing. I don't know what we'll do. That order is going to be over a 9 to 12-year period, and we provide we're there purely as a backstop. Should the financial climate be such that they need our financing.
You did participate, sorry, my time's short. You did participate in 2010 in a transaction. This was with Copa Airlines.
That particular one was Copa, yes?
Yes, and in 2011, that was the value of roughly $177 million.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. You're saying we did a Copa transaction for $177?
In the past, how many Copa transactions have you done?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'm happy to get it.
It's in excess of $500 million. Would that sound right?
That sounds right. That sounds in the ballpark.
Why would that be? Like, why do you have to help?
We are looking at U.S. jobs, and we're competing against Airbus.
No. Before you filibuster the rest of this, what proof do you require to know that they can't get private sector financing? Why can't Copa get private sector financing?
Well, Copa does get a lot of private sector financing. They just can't finance 100% of their fleet privately.
But how do you know that? Where do you get this information?
We get that information both in talking to the actual company, Copa, and we talk to banks, and we get a sense of what the market is.
So let me read what Copa says. Copa description of you, the XM Bank, quote, the Export-Import Bank provides guarantees to companies to purchase goods from U.S. companies for export enabling them to obtain financing at substantially lower interest rates as compared to those that they could obtain without a guarantee, end quote. That's true, isn't it?
Well, actually, sir,
It's true. It's true.
Let me answer the question. Do you want me to answer the question?
Yeah, it's a yes or no question.
No,
That,
it isn't.
was that
It isn't
true or
actually.
false?
We have doubled the price for that airlines pay for financing in the last 5 years.
Is it true that you provide substantially lower interest rates as compared to those they could obtain without a guarantee? That's true, isn't it?
We don't lend them money. No, we provide a guarantee. It's up to the bank to decide what the interest.
And the American taxpayers are responsible for that. They're on the hook for
They
that.
pay a fee, and we have a loan loss reserve that backs up
But
every
what
one of
COPA
those
states
transactions.
in their documents is accurate, isn't it?
We don't make a loan to COPA. We provide a guarantee to a bank.
But you provide it at a substantially lower rate than they would get in private financing.
The rate is determined by the bank, sir. It's not determined by the Ex-Im Bank. We don't determine the rate.
Is it a lower rate or not?
The bank essentially is buying insurance on the loan.
I'm just asking if it's a lower rate or not. It's lower than the private sector.
The private sector is making the loan with our guarantee.
And
We're not making the loan.
But consequently, they get a lower rate.
The interest rate is determined by the bank that's making the loan, not by us.
But not for the guarantee. Listen, what proof do you get from COPA, what documentation, this is just but one example, that they can't get 100% private sector financing?
We look at their additionality. Do they need us? And we also look at foreign competition. Our other goal is to level the playing field. They have a choice of buying Boeing and Airbus, and part of our charter says we need to level the playing field to make sure that U.S. jobs are not put in jeopardy. This transaction will support as many
The
as
question is,
12,000
what
jobs.
documentation do you get? How do you
in their
assess the
application.
market?
It's in their application. They have to assert and make a representation, just like they have to make other representations in their application.
Can you provide
one of
that to
which
this
is
committee?
That representation?
The COPA.
We can provide that representation.
You'll provide the COPA documentation to this committee by when?
Within a week.
Fair enough. In a week, you'll provide to this committee all the paperwork on COPA, correct?
We can provide that to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Seeing no eligible members on the Democrat side at this time, we will recognize Mr. Carter of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. This is an issue that is very important to me and of great interest to me and to my district. Let me ask you, Mr. Hogberg, can you, in your words, in your own words, describe to me what the mission of the Ex-Im Bank is?
Let me try.
Please.
Our goal, our mission is...
Quickly. I got a lot, if you don't mind.
Our mission is to support U.S. jobs and when financing is not available in the private sector or to level the playing field with foreign competition.
Okay. Now, the line of questioning that you just finished, you were talking about interest rates, and that's of interest to me. You don't make the loans. You just guarantee the loans.
Correct.
Okay,
we do make some loans, but not in this particular case.
So, all right, let's talk about the wide-body jets, okay, because that seems to be the point of contention. It seems to be what a lot of people are concerned about. Do you make those loans?
We provide guarantees. We don't make those directly.
Okay, it's my understanding that the Ex-Im Bank has brought back over $1 billion, almost $1 billion to the budget. Is that true?
Well, we are actually, CBO has scored us for $1 billion for 2016. That was the original score that CBO.
Where does that money come from? If you're not making loans, where are you making money on?
No, that comes from fees and loans, and well, fees we collect, and we do collect on a small number of direct loans. We also make some interest.
Okay, let me, and hang with me here, because let me try to explain to you where I'm coming from.
Sure, please.
There are a lot of things that I don't like in this world. I know that's hard to believe, but there are. And I don't like cronyism. I don't like bureaucracy. But more than anything, I don't like debt. And I don't like the fact that our country has $18 trillion in debt. I just despise it. I think it is, as has been said, a threat to our national security. And I'm trying to look for ways to satisfy that debt and to get rid of that debt. And I don't want to do away with something that's generating $1 billion. But if you're not making the loans, and what I'm hearing from some of the critics is that, well, they make a loan to, they'll guarantee a loan to a foreign country in order for that country to buy 12 wide-body jets, and the loan's so good, the interest rate's so good, it's almost as if they pay for 11 and get the 12th one free. I don't like to hear that. That's not right. And I don't think that's the mission of the Ex-Im Bank. I don't think that's what you ought to be doing. Not only that, but we could have made money. We could have made that money and put it toward our national debt. Is that true?
Well, sir, we actually make money and help pay the deficit. We sent $675 million for deficit reduction.
But the point is, if that is true, you could have made more. I appreciate that, but we need a lot more. We got $18 trillion. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of debt we got to satisfy, and we need more. Is it true what I'm hearing? I'm asking you. Is it true that these companies, when they buy 12 jets, that they get such a good interest rate that they almost get a 12th one free?
I have never heard anything remotely close to that assertion before.
Do they get it? But you admitted just a little while ago that they do get a better interest rate?
They pay more than any U.S. carrier ever pays for interest. We verify whenever we do a transaction that U.S. carriers borrow at far better rates than any foreign carrier that we support.
But it just occurs to me, I'm a small businessman, and when I go to the bank to borrow money, I don't get the same interest rate as a big company does, and I understand that. I get that. I'm a bigger risk. It appears to me that that's part of your mission, is to fill that void there and to help American companies to be able to get that backing and that financing. There's a price to that, and I just want to know, are you maximizing that price?
Well, our job is to maximize jobs, not to maximize price.
Okay, well,
and let me just say, Ed, when it comes to wide-body planes, sir, carriers, you refer to the Mideast, they can buy an Airbus wide-body or a Boeing wide-body. We get the jobs in America, we get the jobs in Europe. That's our choice.
I understand that. But, again, I think you're missing a great opportunity here, and we need it. We need it bad. And I need you to focus more on how we can generate more income for this country. I don't want to raise taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes. But if you ask me, because you are using the full faith and backing of the U.S. government, should we be making money off of foreign countries and foreign companies? Yeah. What's wrong with that? We got $18 trillion in debt. We need to be making it somewhere. Remember, I'm a businessman. I'm looking for revenue.
Well, we're supporting $27.5 billion worth of exports last year alone.
That's fine. But again, you can do better.
That is,
but can we do better? That's my point.
well, we step back when the private sector can do it. The only time we're stepping in is when the private sector can't or to level the playing field.
And there ought to be a price for that. That's my point. You got it right there. That's my point. There ought to be a price for that, for the full backing of the United States government.
That's where the $675 million comes from.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was the fastest 5 minutes I've ever seen.
It's amazing how quickly it goes. That is very true. I believe that my ranking member has a unanimous consent request.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to enter into the record an assessment that demonstrates that government export credit pricing, Ex-Im Bank pricing is on par with commercial markets, and demonstrates that foreigners are paying more for credit than U.S. borrowers.
Without objection, so moved. And with that, actually, I have my own unanimous consent request. I'd like to enter into the record Wall Street Journal article, Officials at Ex-Im Bank Face Investigations, which was dated June 23 of 2014. And without objection, I will so move that as well. The good news, we're almost done. The bad news for some of you is you're almost done. I do have a brief moment here as well to take my 5 minutes. I don't plan to take all 5. But I do feel that this needs to be said. Appreciate Mr. McCarthy you coming forward with that information regarding some of the other potential situations that you see with some of the bank employees. I think it's unfortunate it took 2.5 hours for us to get to that point, but that is important information nonetheless to have. Mr. Hochberg, I do want to ask you about the about the best places to work in the federal government rankings report that has come out. For those that aren't familiar, it is rankings that include the views of over 92,000 federal employees. 389 federal organizations are ranked according to overall employee satisfaction and commitment, as well as 10 additional workplace issues such as strategic management, teamwork, leadership, life-work balance. The Partnership for Public Service uses the data from the Office of OPM, Office of Personnel Management, OPM, Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, and as well as surveys administered by 11 additional agencies to put this into place. In a recent survey conducted by the Partnership for Public Service on the best to worst places to work in government, unfortunately, EXIM literally ranked dead last, 28 of 28 for, quote, effective leadership in the most recent survey. This also caught my eye when the category of, quote, support of diversity. There has been a decline of 20 points since 2009, since this administration has come into place. That 20-point decline has allowed EXIM to slide to 27th out of 28 federal best places to work. If asked, this was something else I think is maybe relevant to what Mr. McCarthy is dealing with. When asked if my organization's leaders maintain high standards of honesty and integrity, only 42% said yes. And asked whether they could, quote, disclose a suspected violation of any law, rule, or regulation without fear of reprisal. This is whistleblowing. Only 50% of the employees responded yes, they would feel comfortable and felt that they could disclose a violation of any law. I don't know, Mr. McCarthy, if you are experiencing any of that fear when you're going in and dealing with employees. That would obviously be more than unfortunate if that is the case. I don't care if you care to elaborate, but Mr. Hochberg, my question to you is, why do you think that is, and what are you doing about that?
We take that very seriously, Mr. Chairman. We've had a number of stresses on the agency. Both, frankly, the political environment has not helped. We were under construction for the last few years, but I don't want to just make those excuses. We've made, I told you earlier in the hearing that we made data and improving our data quality one of our top 4 priorities of the year, and the other one is improving the workplace environment, and I take that very seriously. I meet constantly with employees. I meet with informally, have coffee with employees randomly selected every month. We've got a number of programs to make EXIM a more first-tier place to work, but let's not mistake the fact that we've had the political environment, the threat of a shutdown has certainly, for the last 3 years, our employees have been under extreme stress on this.
Just a moment, though. This is not about overall. This is a ranking. So everybody's experienced that.
Not everyone's experienced a shutdown.
Including my own employees who got furloughed, and stresses of building. Just ask the people in Cannon, ask the people anywhere around. I mean, that is happening all the time. I guess my question to you, maybe to refine that, would be, would you be willing to share with our committee and the Oversight Committee here, subcommittees, specifically what your plan is? Because I find that very disturbing that in the past 5 years, 6 years, this agency has slid 20 points in its ranking of supportive diversity. If that is something that is important, we saw this, this is not your bailiwick, but we saw some similar things with the CFPB and other places where there's a feeling that there's a hostile work environment. And if you've got 50% of your employees that believe that they could come under some sort of reprisal for being a whistleblower, that does not bode well. That has nothing to do with workplace stress and whether government's getting shut down.
I was referring to an agency being shut down.
That is extremely serious, and I would anticipate you sharing that with us, and I would assume my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would be very concerned about that as well, and would like to have that. So with that, I have, I think, violated my own. Going over. But with that, I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for members who would like to submit a written statement. We anticipate rapid responses to those. 9 months is a little long. And at that, I would also like to thank our witnesses, especially those that maybe weren't as actively engaged in the conversation. You may be also thankful for that as well. But we do appreciate and value your time for appearing with us today. And if there is no further business, without objection, our joint subcommittees stand adjourned.